call the meeting to order. For all those who don't know, restrooms are down the hall here past the elevators if you need to. There's cookies. Help yourself. Get up and help yourself to cookies and coffee, whatever. Make yourself comfortable. So,
Thank you.
a little goodies. Keep you, so you get a little low blood sugar during the afternoon here. There's always plans to get that. So. We've got a full agenda for the day and lots of material covered. It's been a while since we've got together as a council. A lot of things have happened during that period of time, and Mark's going to give us an update on many of those things that have happened. I really think it's now time to set a stage of what's next for the council, and that's really the conversation later in the session on the agenda. So looking forward to that discussion, and but I think you'll appreciate the kind of progress we made and some of the discussions that have happened. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and we will have time for public comment at the end of the meeting, and we will provide for that. So try to keep the public comments until that point in time. So, Mark.
Well, thank you, Jim. And
why don't we just go ahead and do introductions, because
sure.
there's somebody's on the phone, and I'm not sure who's on the phone, but leader of the council, Jim Pyro, Portland General Electric.
Eric Meslow, Timberton.
Wayne Johnson, Globe 3 Ventures.
Lisa Graham, Paradigm and Inlink. Aubrey Clark, Intel.
Mark Lewis, OEIB.
Go ahead, when we have the audience, just introduce yourself. Go around so you know who you are.
Luis Juarez, CCWD.
Susan Sugarman, OHSU. I'm Kyle Ritchie Knoll with the Oregon Business Council. Marcia Fisher, Oregon University System.
Joe Oshiro, ODE.
Bill Becker, Portland State University and the Portland Metro STEM Partnership.
Sydney Shepard with the Portland Metro STEM Partnership.
Cindy Robert, Rainmakers Community Strategies.
East Lord, Systems. Ted Wolf, member of the Senate Bill 540 Task Force.
Wayne Sue, Portland State.
Kim Finch, Agency District.
Pat Ryan, volunteer parent to the Sun Council from Monona County.
Who do we have on the phone?
This is Tom Thompson, ODE.
Welcome. Okay. Alrighty. So, Mark, why don't you take it from there?
Okay. Well, great. Well, it has been a while since we convened. Last June, I believe, or July. And then we had a couple of additional meetings that we had to cover. And then I had the pleasure of having some one-on-one conversations with each of you over the summer, or the vast majority of you over the summer, to see where we are, to do some stock taking, reflect on what we've accomplished this past year, and to sort of set the stage for the year ahead of us. We're sitting at a time of tremendous opportunity. There is a really broad recognition and a great deal of excitement that STEM and career and technical education are uniquely positioned to drive not only economic prosperity for communities and individuals, but also to meet the workforce needs of the future for our industry partners. There's our STEM investments in this last biennium, in this current biennium, are starting to make a real impact on their communities. They're at a variety of different stages of development, from having been up and running for a few years now with the Portland Metro STEM Partnership, the South Metro Salem STEM Partnership, and then a lot of the nascent partnerships that are developing across the state. And I think it's really important to recognize that, and we're going to be hearing a little bit more and having a longer conversation here in a little bit around those community partnerships. But I think it's really important to recognize that those sorts of initiatives are really unique. This is something that is not natural for many of the stakeholders to be having the conversations that they're having, and we need to be really cognizant of the fact that takes a really concerted effort in order to bring these different cultures and different perspectives to the table to meet the needs of those communities. This year ahead, we have an awful lot to do as a STEM council, and we're going to need to really roll up our sleeves. Last year, you got a really broad overview of various aspects of the STEM educational ecosystem, both from a formal perspective and an informal perspective, from early childhood education all the way through workforce development, and what is happening in the post-secondary space. This year, we're going to need to, as I said, roll up our sleeves, and really, I'm going to be asking a lot from you in this coming year in order to really move this work forward. Want to catch you up on a few things. One, my role has expanded a little bit with the OEIB and the Office of the Chief Education Officer, not only as the Director of STEM, but also as the point person for career and technical education, working closely with our partners at the Department of Education, who have been really spearheading a lot of the work on the revitalization work, and we're working very closely together to see places where synergies exist across these different efforts. I am also, with the departure of Whitney Grubbs to the governor's office, I am also the point person for the regional initiatives, which include the regional achievement collaboratives as well as the STEM initiatives. For me, this is a really unique opportunity because I see that all three of these really fit so tightly together in what we're trying to achieve. They're very complementary strategies, both from an implementation perspective as well as just a philosophical perspective. I also want to let you know that Jamie Rummage at the Department of Education, who has been the education specialist for STEM, is primarily taking on the science role vacated by Cheryl Kleckner, who did a phenomenal job at the Department of Education. And Jamie will be working to effectively implement the next generation science standards across the state. She's also still connected with the STEM work, so you should know that as well, particularly the STEM schools. And we have brought Joe Oshiro on board, who will be helping us manage the other grants, the regional STEM Hub grants, as well as the STEM, CTE, STEAM activities grants. And Joe, as most of you know, is really the original social network around STEM in the state. And I swear if the internet went down, we would be just fine because we have Joe who can make...
But Joe would no longer be fine.
Well connected is what you're saying, right?
She's very well connected to what's going on in the field. She has tremendous amount of experience working with the partners that we care deeply about. She has institutional knowledge as well as a passion for a very strong research base as well around what makes a difference in STEM. And so we're delighted to have Joe joining us and working together on this. And she'll be supporting me as well in supporting this council. So wanted to let you know about that. Joe, did you want to say a few words?
Thank you for welcoming me back onto the horses.
And what a horse it is.
We like to think of it as a racehorse.
I'm thinking more bucking bronco.
Yeah. I want to fill you in because of the career and technical education connections and a lot of work that is happening. I want to give you a brief overview of that. I'll be inviting Laura Roach from the Department of Education and Tom Thompson back at a future meeting here to give you a much deeper briefing on what's happening in the career and technical education field. But I've been having a few meetings or been part of a few meetings that they've convened and Representative Reardon has convened around some about 4 or 5 primary issues that are being discussed. And this has the career and technical revitalization grants that have gone out for the last couple of years. It's really over the last 2 bienniums, but the current biennium is the primary one with $11.5 million being pushed out to various communities across the states, and most of those have had a strong STEM overlap to them as well. But there's a tremendous support all from the Commissioner of Labor, from the traded sectors and others around getting really serious about this hands-on, minds-on learning and getting kids back to being exposed to, not just exposed, but deeply engaged in work that requires them to actually create and build and have very strong connections to future careers. Tremendous amount of partnerships around each of those revitalization grants, and tremendous synergies then with the STEM work that we have in front of us. The five primary issues that are on the table being considered moving forward is, one, a recognition that, and these have come out from the learnings of the revitalization. One is that grants alone cannot do it. The grants are critical. They need to expand the support for those grants, reaching more communities across the state, and also reaching down into the middle school years. High school is too late for many kids who have been turned off by some of the ways that we teach and have not found a place for themselves in the formal school system. So the CTE revitalization work is in part a great way of keeping kids engaged and keeping them in school and increasing graduation rates. And there's some interesting data that has been collected that demonstrates that when students have multiple credits, CTE credits in approved pathways of studies, that graduation rates are currently in the high 80s, and we think that those are going to go up. That shares that type of, pedagogical perspective, or sorry to use education jargon, but your perspectives on the teaching practices of doing and not just reading about things, but actually doing things is deeply shared by the STEM as well. So the revitalization grants are critical. They need to be expanded. A recognition that these programs cost a lot more, so if we want them to be sustainable, we also have to look at differential funding to go alongside that in some capacity to support districts, particularly when times get tough. They look at those more expensive programs. I believe it's not just for the CTE programs that we need to look at this differential funding, but we also need to look at our science programs, and we have to look at our computer science programs in our schools as well,
Mark?
Because all of those cost more.
Can you define differential funding?
Differential funding. So in a funding formula, you get weighting, okay, for the students that you have in your district, in your schools, right? And so for one full-time equivalent, you get X amount of dollars. So in a differential funding formula, which several states across the country have done, and sometimes it ranges from like a 1.1, 1.2 per full-time equivalent, up to something like 1.4 in Washington is what they chose to do. So that means for every full-time CTE student in that class, you basically get compensated, 40% more.
Thank you.
So there's an incentive then to maintain those kinds of programs. Do they write the driver for that?
Yes, absolutely. It's incentive to maintain those programs, to pay for the ongoing costs of equipment, of renewable costs as well, consumables that are associated with that. You think of 3D printer, you think of welding, you think of other programs that require actual resources, that are physical resources that need to be replenished every year. Credit equivalency. So this idea that career and technical education is also mentally rigorous. It's hands-on, minds-on. And shouldn't we, in an applied mathematics course, be getting some mathematics credit for that toward graduation and hopefully toward credentials and post-secondary studies as well? Teacher capacity is an issue. We have an aging CTE workforce that's out there. Oftentimes programs that have been going for many, many years in schools go away as soon as the person who started them retires, and we don't have a lot of teachers in the system right now who can step in. And so I've heard from many districts out in the field who have done these CTE revitalization grants. They say, okay, we've got the money, we want to start up this program on high-tech manufacturing. Okay, who's going to teach it? right? And who has the current skill sets from industry who can actually step in and do it well. And so part of the conversation is how to support and incent teacher recruitment and retention in the career and technical and preparation in the teaching workforce there. And then finally, there's conversations happening about how do we increase access to CTE programs. So looking at this idea of regional centers writ broadly. So don't necessarily just think of physical space, but how do you use either a community college, a high school, online programming to increase access for students. So those are the 5 sort of pieces of the CTE work going forward. Questions? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this may be more broad than the CTE, but as an example, it seems like in addition to the person who can teach the class, there's the people that are educating the students as to the reason for doing that class. So I won't use the old term counselor per se, but what's the corresponding expertise in the school that understands how to guide the students into those classes, and then how it translates to the college courses and, you know, as they get into high school. And I think somewhere in our discussion, I'd like to put that on the table later today maybe, but to me that's a gap that needs to be addressed in addition to the actual teacher teaching it.
Just don't assume natural selection is going to have them show up there at the classroom.
Exactly. Well, and you know, my husband and I consider ourselves fairly reasonably educated, but at the same time, I wouldn't know what to tell my 7th grade son which classes are going to translate to his AA before he gets out of high school. And we're actually asking, and there isn't someone that can tell us the answer. So there's a lot of parents then maybe who don't ask or are afraid to ask. So.
I don't even know the programs exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're putting a lot of pressure on our colleges to reach down, but we could probably help them out a little bit on the other side.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. The whole idea of advising, whether that's in both in the K-12 system as well as in the post-secondary system, is huge. And how to keep, we know that counselors' workloads across the state are incredibly high. Mm-hmm. They're another position that has been cut over the years. And oftentimes counselors are not necessarily career counselors, but and guidance counselors. They're tasked with a number of other duties as well. Mm-hmm. It's been brought up in many places, and as we talk about the investments being recommended by the OEIB going forward, that's certainly a piece of the issues. There's also conversations going on right now, actually in this time, because I'm supposed to be there as well, but there was a conflict. And this is a cross-sector group that has been meeting for the last year, facilitated by Dr. Hilda Rosselli around college and career readiness and developing college and career readiness standards, but also they're picking up this idea of also counseling. How do we get the word out? And particularly for many of our students in poverty, students of color, first-generation college goers who aren't getting the necessary support at home. Not necessarily necessary support, but there isn't an awareness of the opportunities. How do we get access? What does it mean? How do you create the FAFSA forms, fill those out? What's your program of study could be, et cetera. And so solving this is a huge one.
Yep. And it would be a shame if it fell through the cracks between these grants and these organizations. And I don't know where it fits per se with how I see it, but I think we should raise it to be something somebody addresses, like you said, very definitively, either as part of grants that go out under CTE or out of however the OEIB funds schools, or I don't know. I just wanted to make sure that got raised this particular time.
Right. Is that something I just want to check with the sort of the will of the council on that around the table? Because happy to do that and elevate that and to take that forward.
Well, I think a marketing plan around anything we do around STEM CTE, marketing to our customers, I'm sure the parents and the kids, has got to be included.
Well, and I'd second that, especially when you're talking communities of color that are engaged in STEM. You know, whether it's women or it's people of color, and literally you may get shunted out of tech and out of these STEM disciplines while you're in school because somebody doesn't know that there's opportunities there. So maybe changing the paradigm there would be a good thing. I don't know if it's a matter of taking it a step beyond the schools themselves and basically having advocates for people, you know, through their career or something like that. I don't know what it looks like, but the idea being that there are people that can have these industry-related or skills-related or, you know, discipline-related conversations with a broad spectrum of potential students, potential employees, to have them go into these fields.
And I think if you talk to Joe and others that have been involved in this over the years through OPAS and other universities, they all have outreach and marketing ideas that have been done on shoestring budgets. So I can imagine if we make sure that we set aside a percentage of our asks to doing that work in a methodical 5-point content kind of methodology, you would probably do very, very well in regards to increasing the amount of interest in careers with STEM and CTE.
Yeah, and I like your 5-point. I mean, anytime you try to close a sale, right, it usually takes 5 times. And I think a lot of these students need to have somebody that they see more than once and have a trust and a relationship with. And
we're the decision makers, kind of get in front of them. I think what we found also in the past when we've worked on this, industry getting out into the schools is critical in that regard, showing true life pathways. It's one thing if a counselor tells you you can go do something. It's a different thing if you have a company sitting there, you know, pointing out that they have jobs available and this is what those jobs do, putting some context to it. So there's lots of it. Again, I don't want to put Joe on the spot, but Joe and Bruce Schaefer and others that worked fiercely within OPAS did marketing outreach to schools across the state in regards to everything from robotics to actual programs in the universities. So you should put her on staff.
But it really sounds like there's
Good idea.
there's 3 dimensions to this. There's a communications plan, which really makes parents aware of the opportunity. Then there's a place once they go into the schools where the kids can go and get that information or a source to get it. And then third, I think the industry partnership of having industry come in and tell about the great things, the jobs that are available in the CTE and STEM fields, so they can see the full piece of it. It's got to be holistic and all pieces fit together. So.
Especially in local communities. The industries from those local communities coming in and making sure that a lot of kids aren't going to leave their 40-mile window, so they need to know what, if they need to leave their 40-mile window or if there are opportunities for them within that.
I do want to point out or re-emphasize this idea that in all of the STEM grants that went forward, industry partnerships with industry were critical, as well as in the CTE revitalization grants. They were required. Our STEM hubs have very strong relationships with industry. They recognize the power of having individuals who build relationships with both teachers and with students. So that they can convey a different sense of what are those STEM opportunities out there. As we've talked about before, there's some huge perception problems that exist within our system around CTE and STEM. Around CTE, the predominant perception is it's a less than option, and I hate to say it in such blunt terms, but in a system that places higher value on 4-year degree attainment, we tend to send micro messages to people, or sometimes just flat out blunt messages to them that attending a community college or getting an industry certification is a less than option, and that has to change. From a STEM perspective, we have talked about that it is widely perceived as the domain of academically successful, largely white males, and that has to change. And it's also perceived as being fairly boring because it's hard. The way it is taught in many of our schools, it's presented in a way that doesn't really open up people's thinking to the tremendous opportunities in industry and the exciting things from forestry to precision agriculture to high-tech manufacturing, etc. Not just coding, creating games, and other things, which are also pretty exciting too. But it's about solving problems and doing some really cool stuff. So we have some perception issues that we'll talk about a little bit more.
And frankly, the fact that CTE is a pathway to engineering in the STEM degrees. I mean, many of the kids who get to those STEM degrees came through a CTE program or can come through a CTE program.
You know anybody
Yeah, I
like
don't know
that?
anybody like that. I went to Benson, whatever.
An engineer that actually knows how to do something.
Yeah, that's right. Well, whatever. That is important.
So, okay, great. So I think that one of the things that we need to be putting on our agenda, not only on this career connection piece, which will come up in a little bit, but also that it would be wonderful for us as a council to make sure that we are doing our best to communicate around breaking down those perceptions from career and technical education and STEM, and highlighting the synergies and the exciting opportunities in those fields. There's a huge amount of overlap between them. There are some differences when we get down to some specifics. So we'll go with that. I also want to let you know before in just a minute, I'm going to go over some of the recommendations, just to remind you of the recommendations that we've made to the outcomes and investments, and fill you in on the response and where that lies and where that's going. But I want to also just let you know about a tremendous idea that's taking form right now, and that is, I've had several conversations with folks at Oregon State University, University of Oregon, Portland State University around an idea of how do we align some common research agendas to help sort of drive practice within these investment strategies. So as we talked about the need to make some investments, to learn from them, to reinvest and be a lot more nimble there. There's some critical questions that come up along the way. Many of our post-secondary institutions are engaged in research activities to try to answer some of those fundamental questions. Bringing these two sort of things together would be a huge boon for the state, to have a kind of a common research agenda, or a shared research agenda, collaborative and voluntary for sure, that can then leverage additional federal dollars that actually feeds the work of our STEM hubs, that informs the work and the outcomes of our STEM investments, and then also helps us answer some of the gaps that exist in the national research literature around STEM education and the outputs. That sounds really nice and easy. It's going to be really tough. One, we need to be very clear on the kinds of outcomes that matter to us, and let those outcomes then drive the questions that we're asking, because we could ask 1,000 questions that may or may not actually pertain to our work directly. So I just wanted to... Do you have a question?
I did have a question. Who's driving that?
I couldn't say driving it. It's come up in conversations that I had with University of Oregon, with Oregon State University, with Portland State University. We have at OSU, they just hired a new director for, well, a name that's going to be soon changed, and maybe it's already changed, but the Center for Lifelong Learning in STEM, which was really founded by Lynn Dierking and John Falk at OSU around research into the STEM educational ecosystem. Those, not just the formal education system, but the out-of-school opportunities as well. Both the formal out-of-school opportunities, the planned ones, and the unstructured ones as well. And it was really their brainchild. And then recently, Martin Storksteig has joined them, and Martin comes to us with a great deal of policy experience on the national stage, being director of the Board of Science for the National Research Council, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, because he has many other titles that were associated with that. But he's privy to many connections on the national arena around STEM education and research.
So you're working with the department level folks. Have you spoken with the VPs of research for these institutions to make sure that the universities are
We will
stand
be.
behind it?
We will be. So the next step is I've got an email partially written to try to connect these and get people at the table to, one, to assess the degree of interest, what's in it for us as an institution, where does it fit within the state policy arena, how does it inform the work of the STEM Council, how does it inform the work of the STEM hubs, and what would be the advantages there of doing so, and to see whether that there is a degree of interest. So, yeah. Okay. Actually, I want to do one more thing before we go into the actual suggestions, and my computer's starting up. I had the opportunity last night to go and see Neil deGrasse Tyson speak at the Schnitzer. Did anyone here go? Okay. If he's playing, he's talking again tonight. I don't think anybody can get tickets unless you go on Craigslist. But phenomenal. So this is the individual. He's a cosmologist, an astrophysicist, the sexiest astrophysicist alive, according to 2011 Time magazine. And as he laughed at himself, he said, "That was a pretty short list."
Competition, right?
But I did. He said several things that, for me, resonated so very strongly with the work that we are doing, and he had a really phenomenal perspective. He was able to. He's the person. If you've heard of the Cosmos series, that played recently, the 14 episodes of Cosmos, I'll see it. Yeah, is it on?
Well, it's arguable to say he's the face of STEM in the entire United States.
He's the face of science education.
Yeah, science education. He's it. I mean, he's the biggest advocate. He's very articulate. He's
extremely
funny as hell. He engages. He's a minority. I mean, he broadly.
He's irreverent.
He's irreverent. He challenges their own as well as the outside forces. I mean, he absolutely is. If he's not, he should be our poster child for in regards and the leader of this entire thing across the United States. So, do you have any videos or?
I do. That's what I just a 3-minute video, if you'll, around what he's, if we can get it here.
He's also extraordinarily logical.
Well, what I find fascinating is that it's logic isn't his primary message.
He refutes the common arguments against some of this stuff so well, and doesn't allow people to dive down into base, silly arguments.
He doesn't, and he stays apolitical in this. What he's was saying a couple of things last night before I play this video is that he went back. He did a quick little historical journey, and I'm sorry for this little segue here, but it is highly relevant to us. He looked at one. He put out there historically the contributions of Islam to the advancement of science in the world, and a recognition of this. For 300 years, between 800 BC and 880 and 1180, was really the golden age of Islam in regard to science. And then, and he made all these connections. But then, what happened was a cultural shift there, where dogma started to shut down this really vibrant crossroads, where they were pulling in from all of these cultures, different cultural perspectives, and that's what fed the innovation and the growth, the challenging of their ideas to create better ideas. And when that dogma happened, there was a tremendous, almost instantaneously drop off in terms of the contributions to the sciences. He likened that to what is happening currently in the United States with a tremendous decrease in the number of tremendous shift from the United States to other countries in the number of research articles, the money put towards research, and the economic competitiveness of those countries. And there's absolutely direct correlation between investment in research and technology and the economic growth and prosperity of a nation and of a community and of a state. And so he came back time and time again when questions were asked. He said, you have to make it an economic argument because nobody listens to any other argument. But when it affects their pocketbook, and they see how it affects their pocketbook, and he said, if people in the United States want to still have their iPhones and iPads and have this economic prosperity, then we need to invest. It was the bottom line. And I see that argument playing out very strongly in the STEM fields this way. It's not just about filling jobs, it's about creating jobs. And that investments there pay off time and time again. So here, this is the fundamentals. He closed with essentially this argument, and I'll tell you more about the story because there were a couple of teachers, and the last person was a mother who asked the last question, and he gave her a really hard time because she didn't bring her 5-year-old daughter who had seen the entire series and loved Neil deGrasse Tyson. He said, "Where is she?" "She's at home because she has school tomorrow." And he's like, "Really?" "This is me. I don't come to Portland very often." "I'll write her a pass." So it was quite funny. Anyway, here he is. I hope.
When I think of science, I think of a truly human activity. Something fundamental to our DNA. Something that drives curiosity. When you're a kid, you're born a scientist. What does a scientist do? We look up and say, I wonder what that is. Let me go find out. Let me poke it. Let me turn it around. This is what kids do. Kids that can barely walk, what are they doing? They're turning over rocks. They're plucking petals off a rose. They're exploring their environment through experimentation. That's what we do as human beings. So what do? We prevent that. We prevent these depths of curiosity from revealing themselves, even within our own residences. You know, we spend a year teaching our kids to walk and talk, and the rest of their lives tell them to shut up and sit down. What kind of environment is that? The goal here is not to make everybody a scientist. That's not the goal. What a boring world that would be. You want artists, you want musicians, you want novelists, poets. You want the rest of this. What matters is whether they're scientifically literate and maintain that literacy and that curiosity throughout their lives, no matter what becomes their profession. People think science literacy is being able to recite facts, and it's not that. It's a part of it, but it's not the main part. The main part is, how do you look at the world? What does the world look like through your lens? If you're scientifically literate, the world looks very different to you. It's not just a lot of mysterious things happening. There's a lot we understand out there. And that understanding empowers you to first not be taken advantage of by others who do understand it. And second, there are issues that confront society that have science as their foundation. You can't look at science and math as some separate subject. It's fundamental to what it is to be alive because it's all around us. And it influences your health, your safety, how you're going to have to vote, what issues are before you politically. If you're not scientifically literate, it's in a way you are disenfranchising yourself from the democratic process, and you don't even know it.
He's got some of the best TED speeches that have ever been done.
Yeah.
If you ever have a chance to.
He does. He has some amazing ones. he hit this theme at the end time and time again with educators, with this mother, this idea of supporting and fostering curiosity. Plain and simple. That is our role as parents and as educators. Because if somebody is curious, they're going to continue to learn. They're going to continue to be voracious about interacting with their environment. And as we have put forward a potential definition of STEM as applied curiosity, that insatiable desire to know and a drive to actually create and to bring something else into the world, I think it's powerfully, it has a powerful resonance with people and can help us cut through a lot of the structural pieces that tend to, I think, oppress curiosity in our system. He did something with the entire audience. He asked, how many teachers, of the people, how many teachers did you have in your life that had a profound impact on who you are still today, that you can recall, that had a profound impact on how you see the world? And he went, how many people had more than 5? How many people had 5? How many 4? How many 3? How many 2? How many 1? How many none? And the largest number were 2 and 3 in the audience. And it's certainly true for me when I think about it. That's not saying that the others were bad in my life, but that those 2 or 3 came with their full selves. You didn't want to leave their classroom. You didn't want it to end because they challenged you to think differently about it and not just do more homework. We don't need more rememberers, right? You never think, as he danced across the stage saying, "Ooh, homework, that's fun." No, you don't remember that stuff. It's other impacts that you have, and for those parents, he said, we protect them from breaking that egg. That child who picks up that egg and is feeling it, that 2-year-old feeling it, and it's going to break, right? But we stop them. And then what happens when you break it? Well, how cool. You've got something that started out hard, and now it's fragile. And boy, there's just all this liquid stuff coming out, and some of it's orange and some of it's clear, and it feels all slimy and cool. And then you poke the yellow, and it breaks and spreads. I mean, what a fascinating learning opportunity. And what? It's a little bit of mess on the floor, and it costs you 25 cents. Why stop them? Anyway, so it was fascinating. He ended up talking for 3.5 hours and answering questions, which is much more than the Rolling Stones concert that I saw when I was in my youth, much longer. And almost as interesting in a different way. Let's put it that way. So
that's good. Thanks for sharing.
Interesting lesson there for us. Okay. What I do want to do now is just remind us of, and Jim, maybe you can help if you want to tee up this our presentations here to the outcomes and investment. And I just want to do 5 minutes with this, not extensively, but just to remind us of.
Yeah, we had an assignment to really kind of report to the subcommittee on what we wanted to see in the budget. One of the things they made it clear is they didn't want to see money, dollars. They wanted to see concepts and ideas. And so we tried to capture what we felt was the direction we were going, to provide them some insights to what we were talking about. Always comes to money, but we never really had that money conversation, which is fine at that point. It's part of the process. And I think, as we presented, the OEIB is really trying to figure out how to nest these things all together and make a coherent package for the governor so that it's well connected and hits all aspects of the education system. So with that, I'll let you kind of talk about it. And I think that's our challenge now, is to take it from this concept to really integrate it into an entire package.
Yeah.
To get funding for this. So.
Absolutely, that's part of our challenge before us. The directive was really to the different entities and agencies within the OEIB under their purview to look carefully at the various barriers within the system, and what are those critical things that we need to do right now in order to address them. And the charge was on the what and the why. Okay, not the how, but the what and the why. What do we need to do, and why do we need to do it? And I think that that's a really valuable place to linger for a while, because when you get to the how, then people start bringing up the yeah buts and how much does it cost, and we know that we can come up with all manner of excuses, but if we're clear on the what and the why, we figure out a way to actually make it happen. And so we started out just giving a little history. We were making the arguments about STEM is jobs, STEM is about economic growth and innovation, STEM is about prosperity for both individuals and the communities, that right now we're not creating enough STEM individuals or through the formal education system, and I know that you think more broadly than just degree production in this, so but this is a piece.
We need to refresh the data.
We need to refresh the data, and I'll work with John on doing that. Yeah, so good point. That'll be one of our subcommittees, is refreshing data. Additional challenges within the system, that lack of career connections and career awareness is certainly a piece of that. We've got isolated pockets of evidence or of excellence. So just a recognition of some other challenges and barriers within the system that our priorities were then going to be addressing. The three priorities that this council put forward was an investment in this this statewide network of regional STEM hubs, along with the connective tissue and support to ensure communication across those STEM hubs, but that they were the primary sort of infrastructure, if you will, not physical infrastructure, but intellectual capital and partnerships and social networking and professional networks that would deliver solutions across the state tailored to the needs of the local communities. The second strategy was this idea that we needed some strategic investment funds that enabled us to act like a business investor, and that is to scale the things that we know already work, and then to invest in discovery as well of things that are emerging as having high potential, and to do that again both through the hub network as well as to separately for those places that aren't served by hubs, but scaling those practices and spreading them predominantly in the middle school years and predominantly for our underrepresented and underserved students, our students of color and our women in those years. And then this idea that in our post-secondary space, we needed to provide opportunity and incentive funds to more tightly couple the education programs that exist with the industry needs, from not just it's sort of taking the ETIC model and expanding it into other ways. And there's a lot of conversations going around on that Talent Development Council, both at the HEC, at the Oregon Workforce Investment Board. Laura McKinney here from the ETIC and Eric and others have been meeting with a number of different constituencies, and this is something that has a lot of legs and a lot of support from a lot of different areas. We need to, there still needs to be several conversations around how to get that coherent and where it lands in terms of responsibilities, but again, our role was putting forward the what and the why, not necessarily the how, and this is a critical piece, along with support in those post-secondary institutions for our students of color to increase their attainment and to break down certain barriers that exist in cultures, in support, a number of different aspects there.
One question. So if asked where pre-K and early childhood falls more around what the STEM Innovation Network is doing?
Right now, as you know, early childhood education is critical. The STEM hub, not the STEM hubs, the early learning hubs are expanding across the state. They're working on building those infrastructures. We see that integration with those efforts over time.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't put forward as a primary here in this, sense of right now putting that forward as that sense of urgency. So those conversations are definitely happening at Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. Well, just because it's explicitly not listed here, so I wanted to ask.
Yeah. No, good point. Oh, well, and you'll know that in strategy 2, we talked about 75% of the funding going to that upper elementary, middle school years, that place where that STEM identity is being formed.
Thank you.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the various arguments for all of these, but I did want to mention in strategy 2, we also talked about the great deal of need to find ways of supporting out-of-school programming or extended learning opportunities that also exist. How do we support them, and how will we tie them more closely to what's happening within the formal school system as well? So I'm using those funds to help us do that. So that's what we put forward. There's some things that evolved, particularly in that strategic STEM programming. There's and we put forward this idea that we needed to incent more focus on engineering and sort of the engineering, the basics of engineering and different types of engineering in that. We talked about computational thinking and coding and increasing that presence in those age groups. And we talked about the need to focus on mathematics as well, and having students be much more successful in mathematics and have a deeper and long-lasting understanding of mathematical principles. So those were the 3 sort of subject areas, if you will, within that program.
So without looking forward in regards to dollars, can we at least look backwards and understand where we've invested today in these areas? I know, for example, on STEM Innovation Network, this last biennium there was an investment made. What was the amount?
It was $2.8 million that was made in the STEM Innovation Network.
And then they...
and that was for 6 funded hubs.
Okay.
And basically minimal central staff support at all.
And then the STEM Strategic STEM Programming grant?
It was $2.5 million.
And for both of those categories, are they things where they were, in a sense, startup funds, they would then become sustaining on their own, or is there the expectation that they're going to need sustaining funding this next biennium?
Good question. For the STEM Innovation Network, if we want this to succeed, and I want this very badly to succeed, this is something that I'm deeply passionate about, and there needs to be sustaining dollars from the state to support this. We cannot count on communities and community partners to do the entire lift on this at all. We can expect them to be entrepreneurial, to leverage the local resources, the human capital that exists in communities as much as some financial capital. But it's not something that can stand on its own without that support. It's very, very, very difficult to do so. And to convince funders around that coordination, that backbone, that communication, that takes a tremendous amount of effort. And it needs to be funded by the state. It needs to come. That, as well as some programming that complements those efforts and supports those efforts. But I think it's that ask for the match as well as provide that sustained funding to keep those things going. The idea is that these, in many communities, we're seeing these integrate with the Regional Achievement Collaboratives, and Laurel Singer will be joining us in a minute to talk more about that and how those start aligning up across the state. In terms of the strategic STEM programming, this is something that went out as kind of this biennium funding was the expectation to try to close the opportunity gap that exists, and connecting to the world of work. There wasn't necessarily an expectation of renewed funding. I believe that we need to be much more deliberate about that investment and to take to scale the things that are working and not just be putting a lot of one-off grants out into the field, because that is tremendous challenge for those programs who are seeking funding. We need much more sustained efforts.
2.5 for the STEM grants was the money that was out of the CTE grants that got remarked.
Separate.
Separate.
So in addition to the CTE revitalization grants, there was $2.5 million in STEM activities grants.
And there was a portion of the CTE grants that were supposed to be STEM related as well, is that right?
Tom, are you still there? Tom Thompson?
Yeah, I am.
Can you speak to what percentage of the CTE STEM grants, CTE revitalization grants were STEM related?
Just based on what they said, it's probably 60-70% of them.
Yeah. I was just
Thank you.
just remembering that there was a specific legislative carve-off around the CTE revitalization grants.
For STEM.
I appreciate that.
Oh, yes.
There was for sure huge overlap as we've discussed.
Right.
But there wasn't there. I'm just trying to.
I believe there was $1 million specifically carved off for that, but then a lot of the additional CTE revitalization grants went to STEM-related programming.
Okay, well, that's a good baseline. And then around the talent industry, post-secondary talent development, I can let people know that there's probably about $7 million moving forward that are kind of in that innovation, new investment bucket. So maybe some scale.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm going to exit this and move on here because I want to give you a sense of. So we presented this. It was really unique what's trying to happen here in terms of making recommendations to the governor's budget. There were over 100 different proposals put forward by the various agencies for consideration by the Outcomes and Investments Committee. They tried to make sense of all of this, and there was a lot of great questions that pushed back and forth, and some new things that arose from those conversations. In your packets, you'll have 3 sheets, 3 one-pagers that look like that. And these are the 3 buckets that became organizing principles for all of these various initiatives. You'll see the first one is Pathway to Kindergarten Readiness and Third Grade Reading. Dr. Golden speaks very strongly and passionately about ensuring that we have, from an equity perspective and otherwise, there's a great deal of research around those students who achieve reading proficiency by 3rd grade being 4 times less likely to drop out and more successful in school overall. And so all of those early learning opportunities, which are great, are very complementary to each other, were part of this bucket. The STEM in the second bucket, the pathway to high school and post-secondary completion, which some could argue that those are 2 buckets, but it's nice to see them as 1 bucket because it looks at it as a continuum and as a pathway here. You'll see both in there the STEM hubs as being an essential support and piece of this as well. For those who question, well, one of the things that I questioned was the check marks to the right in that matrix, because the STEM hubs hit all of those. They definitely hit those. They're a collective impact partnership. They're into P20 essential skills. They're working with educators to be more effective and implement the Common Core and the next generation science standards, increase the learning environment, the quality of the learning environment, and they're a systemic approach to redesigning and transforming schools. So I made that argument several times, and they said, we're not going to have more than 3 check marks because then everybody is going to do it. So that's all right, but just to know that everybody inside knows that those hubs are hitting on all cylinders there. One of the things that was interesting that rose up, and I just want to highlight this, is there was the pushback, I guess, on the STEM proposals was, why STEM? Why a separate initiative here? Why call out just this particular field? And I think that goes. Some of that question goes to the perception problems that we're facing. These kids are already on the track. Why why highlight this? And so we went back to the outcomes and investment and made a stronger pitch of the conversation of tying education to that economic development, to workforce, to community development, to transforming the educational system and how we're thinking about educating our youth, and the great deal of community partnerships that exist around this. So that started to resonate really strongly with the committee, and a recognition, and really it led to, that conversation specifically led to the third bucket of connecting education to career pathways. And so then it became very supported. Ooh. Yeah. Thanks. The other piece was this recognition that the biggest barrier perhaps in STEM attainment that we're seeing in the post-secondary space and in the K-12 space is around mathematics. Whether that's developmental mathematics, and we had a presentation to this council very early on about the significant amount of people who entering into the community college system, the ones directly from high school, 64% had to take developmental mathematics. When you have to take developmental mathematics in order to pursue that engineering, that pre-engineering coursework, or to become a nurse practitioner or whatever, it's a huge barrier. It becomes a huge barrier. And oftentimes the quality of those programs need to be addressed, as well as the alignment of the content needs to be addressed. Is it, do we really need to know quadratic equations, or, actually you could choose your subject area in mathematics and pick on it. But the bottom line is that there's a recognition that we need to do something very big and very systemically around mathematics. And there's already some great conversations happening through what used to be the CCWD and Elizabeth Cox Brand and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission and others, the Department of Education as well. So around mathematics alignment and shifting practice. So that has elevated, and I think it's certainly something that we as a council should be strongly endorsing and getting behind in part of our messaging. Yeah.
So, quick question on
Yep.
that. I know I keep asking a lot today. When we first started meeting, there was discussions about, like you said, really changing things. So it's not time in the seat, for example. It's accelerating as you learn. So we really revolutionized how we call grades. And so I guess my question would be, are those conversations taking place somewhere within the Department of Education where there's efforts to actually move that way? And if so, how do we position to support that?
Yeah.
Would be one question. Or if they're not happening, what should we be doing as a council to help at least have that discussion happening? So I don't know, Mark, I just want to put that out there. I don't know what you guys think.
There's no doubt there's these huge overarching educational reform pieces that we have to apply to, and that's certainly one that you just mentioned. There's about a dozen others.
Yeah.
And just, we are not well briefed in on what the other work is within Salem on that. And it'd be helpful to understand.
Well, if there's
competency
grants,
grading versus, the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
well, and if there's going to be an ask of some dollar amount, it seems like there should be a discussion as to, is there some portion of that where we could back support programs from an industry perspective, or I don't know, but another way to incentivize and help support whoever's got that big. So I agree with Eric. If we knew more, we'd be smarter about it.
Yeah.
And from a practical standpoint at the OEIB, I know you guys aren't supposed to be talking about money, but
well, we do at some point.
I know at some point.
We will at some point.
The fact is, I'm sure it's already happening. It's just not happening in public. The point is, which one of these costs the most amount of money? I mean, I look at, you start third grade reading is a huge lift, right? I mean, could be hundreds of millions of dollars. I think what I heard down in the legislature. Pathways, how big is this one? Which one's the small one? Right? And are we falling in the small bucket and priority list and everything else? Just to have an understanding of what our expectations should be moving forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm putting you in a hard spot, but this does come down to money at
It
some
always
point.
comes down to money.
And the fact is we don't have, I know that they're not talking about money in Salem, but we ought to know in this room what our expectations are for money, right? And we can't set that expectation until we have some idea what kind of pie is being divided up. So, we have to know.
And our role
And we
in
have-
that going forward.
We have to be advocates because at the end of the day, we were given a charter to increase the number of degrees and to increase the proficiency in math.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen by osmosis.
No, and I understand why the OEIB is going through the budgetary process they are, because the quicker numbers are put to things, the quicker you have opponents and tractors and everything else. But it's handcuffing us right now in understanding. I mean, if we were just going for small millions, maybe it's not a big deal. But if we're going to make a big ask, right, it's a huge deal. Because suddenly we are going to be in a competitive process against, teaching third graders to read, which I'm not interested in being competitive against. But we have to,
Well, if they don't read in third grade, they're never going to get the other thing anyway. So
The other two pieces of paper don't matter.
yeah.
We don't.
So,
and I know there's probably not an answer that you can easily comment on, but I just think it's critical that this council starts to understand what we want, right, in regards to how many zeros and commas are in it and what we want to do with it.
And then I guess where we can put the energy behind supporting that. Because I think there's an antsy little bit, at least from me, of okay, now let's get in there and help push. So
you have to understand this is not going to happen overnight. So it's
No.
got to be a continuing commitment. It's just that you're going to throw money out 1 year and you're going to say, well, it's going to change. Well, it isn't going to change. It's going to take 10 years of this on a consistent basis, changing the system.
And I know for a fact that the frustration I'm feeling is also being felt from people that actually have a vote in this state, in the legislature. They're in the dark as well of what's going to be put down in front of them. And they're trying to position right now legislative concepts and everything else without having any idea of what kind of numbers should be behind them and whether or not they'll have support for the governor's budget. So I know you have on here, what is the budget process going forward? Are you going to detail some of the critical dates that we have to have some decisions by and when the OIB will make decisions and we'll have an understanding if we're on the outside looking in or if we're on the inside looking out?
A little bit.
Okay.
I can do that certainly. A couple of things. One, to answer the first question that went out onto the table, and that is around basically what's known as competency-based assessment or proficiency-based assessment. There's a lot of work going on right now. Business Education Compact is working throughout the state in a number of places to support proficiency-based learning. Teach Oregon through the Chalkboard Project is also really complementing those efforts in a similar fashion. The Network of Quality Teaching and Learning that was funded through the legislature and is being spearheaded by the Department of Education is also that is a piece of their thinking as well as mentoring and other supports for educators. So yes, and I'm happy to bring individuals forward to give you a better sense of what that landscape looks like in some of our future meetings.
And Mark, as part of those programs then, are they wrapping dollar money requests up through the OEIB for being able to support those things? And that's where that big ask will happen? Or are they looking for some outside councils or other places that are going to help for those big asks? That's the part that's not clear to me.
Okay.
Is how are those going to get funded and supported?
Yeah, the Network of Quality Teaching and Learning has certainly been one of those strategic investments where there's an expectation of continued investment on the part of the legislature to support going forward.
Actually, the Quality
Isn't it?
Teaching and Learning Network is funded, and I work for Chalkboard Project. It's funded statutorily, so we don't have to have a strategic investment or a line item from the governor. It is taken off the top of the state school funds. So about $32 million is what it comes to. Is that enough based on what the governor decides? I don't know, but there is an allocation already there.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
So I would say if we only get $2.5 million, we shouldn't spend a lot of money on that and spend the $2.5 million on something in the classroom.
Something on over here.
Yeah, support it, but don't fund it.
It might be useful to provide whatever whatever recommendation formally that we do, though, calling out that we support and back those things is seen in as critical pieces, which then sets the stage for, I think, clarity for the legislature. We're not asking for that. You're taking care of that. We're asking for these other pieces that fit with that.
That connect and
Yeah.
making that connection
Exactly.
is important for us
and
to
then
do.
the STEM Council and the others are giving the governor, I think, what he asked for, which is a holistic view at our STEM approach. And that, I think then it gets real simple to see how it all adds up and where the gaps are that we'd like to cover.
It seems like there's some natural connections between math education, CTE, and STEM degrees. And the question is that a holistic kind of view, or is that we have 3 buckets, and the question is, can you be more strategic by going in as a holistically and say, this is what it looks like, and does that make sense? Can everyone come together and say this whole continuum, therefore you can ask for maybe more money or a bigger footprint to make things happen? I worry that there's individual silos going on, and people say, well, so group is in here asking for math, another group's in here asking for CT, another group's asking for STEM, and is there a better picture to be able to pitch this to the legislature as we're all working together to get an outcome? But it's got some issues with it too, I think. But I think that's a thought process.
What you just mentioned was the topic that was on Monday at the Higher Education Committee, it's legislative days, was the confusion of all these different things coming in. How can we get CTE and STEM to be on at least the same dance music? There may be individual pieces of legislation that go forward for them, but that we're all moving the same direction.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you took a history lesson and looked back 100 years, you'd have conversations going on about what level of education people needed, and whether they needed certain technical skills or not, and how many of those that you actually taught in school. Okay, so we're in a different place now, where it's getting to the point where these math skills, these STEM skills are now core. Well, not everybody actually may believe that. So they may be willing to have very different conversations about where the limited dollars should be spent. And if we're looking at not only preparing a workforce, but actually strategically positioning ourselves to be, at the front, preferably, of our socioeconomic conversation, then what things should we be doing strategically? And should we be looking at that from a longer term perspective, shall we say, as opposed to a 2-year look like we tend to look very often? So that we don't get into this conversation every 2 years about how many dollars we're going to spend on, a fractal of the conversation needs to be addressed. So, for instance, when I think about these STEM hubs, if we say that we are committed to having some sort of access to a STEM hub-like environment all across the state in the next 10 years, well, what does that look like? Well, I can't tell you exactly what that looks like, but now I've put a stake in the ground that says, if you live in any corner of the state that you live in, there will be some sort of organization, some sort of structure that ties you into the STEM activities that are going on in the state. Okay, so now we know we need to fund that in some way, shape, or form. And there'd be that expectation every 2 years that we're going to be figuring out exactly where those dollars are going to be spent based on the needs, based on where we actually live. So I would think that using that as an example, we'd be setting some sort of perspective, some sort of look into our strategic process that informs the budgeting that we end up doing. And that would actually help the legislators, that would help the education system, that would help everybody in the continuum understand the direction that we're going in. But I also think that it's really key that we tie that to some sort of economic outcomes. If it's just about going and teaching people things and hoping that they'll figure something out, I think that makes it really hard for people to plan. So, if we say that we've got certain clusters that we're supporting in the state, it may not be what we do in 10 years, but that's what we're doing right now. And that there are industries that are supporting it that are in those clusters right now, and there are dollars to be actually accessed right now, and there's value that comes out of the education around those right now. So, can we say, in the short term, this is where we're going to spend our dollars, how many of the dollars we're going to spend? It may not be a lot of money, but to be able to say that we're going to source these many computer science people out of our system in the next 5 years, as an example, because there certainly is a significant demand for those folks, would be a good thing in my mind to say.
But there's an ROI to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're already going to be on the small side of the budget. We know that. So it's small side of the budget's great sometimes because sometimes it slides right through because it's just a little bit of money. But other times it's the easiest thing to cut because it's a small side budget. And then so ultimately, we're fortunate in CT and STEM that we are one of the only places in education where there is a pretty direct ROI that can be calculated. You're not going to get an ROI on third grade reading that's definable as you're not going to be able to go in and say if everybody can read at third grade, it's going to be worth $18.2 billion to the GNP at some point. You can, to a certain degree, do that with what we're talking about. So we should be able to elevate ourselves out of the conversation a little bit and make a priority to the small investment we're asking. We do have goals in regards to how many STEM hubs we want in the state of Oregon. Is that correct?
Loosely. In
but
terms
loosely.
Yeah.
So we know how many we have now. We know how much it took to create that many. So we should be able to put a number on that pen of it's going to take another $7.5 million or $10 million to create the number of hubs that we believe are necessary. The STEM grants is a looser number, and the stick is certainly a looser number. So there is just about what you get for how much you invest on an ROI basis. So we can say we want 15 million, and then if people come back and push back because this goes through the sausage grinder and says that's not available at that level, what can you do with 5 instead? I think we'd be easily prepared to have that conversation, but to not stick a stake in the ground and say this is what we believe is the minimum amount we want to advocate for.
Yeah, and why?
And why?
With some history to put
We
behind
will
it.
get budgeted to the sidelines, I believe. Because third grade reading is a lot more interesting to a lot more legislators than what you're doing, I think. So, anyhow, my high horse, I'm a tactics guy, get it going. We're in September, the governor's budget is put to bed, or the initial first blush of it is when? I assume you're turning in OEIB budget proposals for the next full biennium as well right now?
The OEIB has had a first reading on these proposed investments from the subcommittee. They will, in their October meeting, will be finalizing the conversation to move that forward.
And you've put together your budget, correct, for the next biennium?
The OEIB organizational budget?
Well, your budget request for the next biennium. Have you put that together, given it up to your bosses in regards to what you want?
Like me personally,
yes.
for
your
my
pieces
budget?
For STEM Council, for staffing, for all these things?
With some additional contingencies if we get funded.
Okay. So what I have a problem here with is the background game. I got a real strong sense when I was in Salem this week that the game's afoot completely and being completely gamed by the folks that are on the inside, while councils like ourselves are sitting here spinning. And when are we going to be in the game, right? Or are we even meant to be in the game? And if so, how do we act? How do we get a number on how we advocate? How do we get in and push at the OEIB and push at Nancy and push at the governor's office to make this a priority, as opposed to just walking it through the process that I think is getting gamed?
Well, I think from...
Anybody else feel that way? I mean, I don't need it.
Yes, Eric, yes.
I'm the only one willing to say it.
I respect that we needed to get to a place where we had some things to talk around.
Yes.
But it feels to me like it's right now. We better have the numbers and the plan and the longer strategy down with some tactics. So I'm feeling that too.
Right.
And it does feel a bit like there's a lot being talked about, and we're just not quite caught in.
I agree with that, and specifically because there is the information we have on our paper here, and then there's the way many people see the world, which is not this way.
Yes.
Okay, so education being a piece of the overall budget, people are going to approach this education conversation from their vantage point. Consequently, so let's use the economic development perspective. We've got these different regional groups that all have specific goals in mind. They all have their workforce areas that are connected to. And out of that, you might have some very different education needs that go along with that. So now if you were aligning a strategy that said, okay, we're going to make sure that we have STEM hubs in each of these regions that's going to be connected with your economic development activities. Now, each of those folks has a reason to actually talk to the education folks. If you come at this as an education thing, they're going to look at you and say, well, okay, you guys just want a whole bunch of money, and we're not quite sure we're going to ever see any of it, so why should we support that?
In other words, how does the business community get pulled in here to help push and support? But it should be a win-win with education.
Or an industry council.
Right.
Not an educational council.
Yes.
Yeah, we're in a very unique position that doesn't really, I think, have an analog to any other council that I know of in the state. Perhaps there is, but we are separate. This is a separately legislated council of industry members represent who are asked to report through and to the OEIB. But it's also a separately legislated council. We are not a subcommittee of the OEIB. You are not a subcommittee of the OEIB, but you're being staffed through the OEIB. And so in terms of the OEIB's process, these recommendations are being submitted to the for consideration for the governor's budget. We all know that after that, there's some sausage making that happens internally, as you put it, and it goes to the legislature, and then the legislature has their own thoughts and opinions on what ought to be there and supported and shaped. I think that there is a legitimate role for industry and to make their wishes known in terms of advocating for the things that we want to see happen. I mean, as a STEM council, I think that is a legitimate thing for us to have a conversation on.
I want to make sure the council members take is that you just mentioned that we're trying to work through a process with the OEIB, even though we're not beholden to the OEIB. Because that's the best way to do business. And I agree, that's the best way to do business, unless you're not going to get the outcome that you're hoping for as the council. And if you feel that we're not going to get the outcome by working through the process, we're not beholden to that process. We don't have a boss saying, no, you can't do it that way, unlike marketing maybe has. Right? The council has the ability to say whatever we want, to put forward what we're on, to get whatever we want on the record, making the OEIB or any other group make a hard decision, as opposed to making a decision by just time and process. Same deal we deal with ETIC, same thing, do we really want to have a strong voice for an ask? And if we do, we need to get it probably done and put the OEIB on the spot, but make them make a hard decision. And I think, when I'm reading articles in the Oregonian about the OEIB coming together and having all these proposals coming in, no dollars being put on any of them, and not seeing our agenda anywhere in those articles mentioned was concerning. And talking to people on the inside, were we there? Did they know that the STEM Council has a three-pronged approach, and it's going to cost X amount of money, or roughly? And I don't know if that's happening. And I know that you probably have lots of things going on that we're not briefed on, but it just feels like we're not part of the game. And we better be clear as a council what we want, because if it doesn't match up with the way the game's going, we're going to have to play the game differently. And it's just a backup plan. I still want to work through the process the right way and be collaborative and everything else, but at the same time, we're not here to be part of the regular state machine. We're here to say what we believe is what industry's needs are around STEM.
And I think it's very difficult to hear that we're still trying to explain why STEM. You just said that, Mark, that we were down there saying, why does STEM have its own special thing? Why are we still even having that discussion?
Yeah.
Within
Nancy
the
knows
OEIB,
it, or Nancy
within the OEIB.
Yeah.
That's concerning. I'll echo that. Yeah. I understand if our general population might still need that branding, but I would expect our education folks to be there.
The legislature understands it.
They do. And I guess where I come out, and I agree with Eric, we need to be collaborative and do the right thing here. And what I mean by that is there's something we all agreed to do and represent. There's something I feel very accountable to do and have the industry side heard for the guys, the continuum of STEM. So maybe it would be helpful to understand how the things we're coming out with here together are actually being heard and moving forward visibly, and how the money piece actually happens, right, Eric? I mean, that's where you're going.
Well, and again, you guys did your proposal. I was there the day you guys did it. It made sense, and I think that you got a few folks up at the OEIB council or board or whatever the heck they are nodding, right? You had a few advocates up there. But is it a situation where this STEM council should be going to the 7 people who don't get it or don't see it as a priority and be advocating for it and educating them? Or is that something we leave up to the OEIB to do internally, or the ODE to do internally with the OEIB? Or HAC needs to be doing something if you know, who's doing this if we're not? And then ultimately, if we're not doing it, I can guarantee you we're not getting our message prioritized, because everybody else has other fish to fry.
Maybe just a little clarity too. Maybe I need to understand this. I was just looking at the law that created us, and it says we do.
So am I.
We shall function under the direction and control of the OEIB. So it established blah blah blah. The council shall report to the chief education officer. Got that. Then it says the council is established for the purpose of assisting the chief education officer in developing and overseeing a long-term strategy to meet the goals. The question is, does Nancy have a long-term strategy that we both agree to? We're supposed to advise her on that. What is that strategy? We've made our pitch of what we think the right strategic things to do is to advance this effort. Has she embraced that strategy, and does she have a long-term strategy that we're aligned on? We gave the pitch, we gave it to the OAB, but ultimately it's the chief education officer who has to carry that message and say, here, I have a responsibility under here to deliver a long-term strategy to address these 2 goals. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I don't know what her strategy is, if she said this is it, or she's got other things, or where that fits. So maybe that's the...
Well, and generally the only way you can ever see whether or not people believe in a strategy in the state is whether or not they fund it, right? They put money behind it.
Well, that's
what we're talking about right now.
Yeah. So strategy, and can the strategy, does it have teeth behind it to make it happen?
Yeah, because she can have a great strategy, but if there's no dollars behind it,
that's fine.
Yeah. I acknowledge the concerns of the council, and I'm hearing them pretty loud and clear on that. 2, in the initial reading or conversations around the STEM investments proposed, there was, this, how do we weigh 3rd grade reading against, this, et cetera, et cetera. I can tell you that as we took the conversations in that subcommittee back to the chief education officer, Dr. Golden was very adamant that the STEM pieces, the STEM strategies, the STEM investments proposed were part of the larger picture of what was recommended. And as a result, that conversation was that these were the recommendations to the chief education officer from the subcommittee. The chief education officer, in consultation and with this broader view, put it back to the subcommittee that this is a priority. And so
do you think will be in the governor's budget?
Somebody's
got to ask this question. Are we going to be in the governor's budget, or are we not? I mean, it's...
If you're asking
because
me...
we have no other options right now to advocate to the OEIB to be in the governor's budget. We have done our thing. We threw it up against the wall. It's sitting there. They're doing their game right now. Is it leaning for us being in the governor's budget, or are we on the outside of the governor's budget?
I have no crystal ball. I know that about CTE and STEM, I've received queries about and that say to me that there is a great deal of interest and support to ensure that these are pieces of the budget. Again, there's a lot of competing interests there, and
So
I
when
think-
asked how much for each of these strategies are you asking or representing that we need to execute these strategies? You have to give a number, right?
Sure.
And number is...
Yeah, does that number exist
No,
already?
I think, yes, the number exists in terms of, look, if we're doing some back of the envelope, we're looking at the regional STEM hubs right now at $2.5 million. If you're looking at supporting doubling that number, we can get to a $5 million, let's do some hand waving back of the envelope calculations. As a former engineer, plus or minus an order of magnitude in some cases is just fine, but we want a little more precision than that. So let's say roughly $5 million there. If we're looking at the post-secondary talent development, and we've got around $7 million for predominantly electrical engineering and computing science, and we want to expand that to healthcare and a couple of other areas, knowing that we're in a biennium and there'd be transition. So you're thinking, oh well, we can't we can't do a 4x because that's ridiculous. We would never have the capacity to deliver on that, and there's other work to be done. Is a 2x a reasonable number? Yeah, I think a 2x is a reasonable number. Could it be less than that? Probably. So somewhere between 10 and 15, you come up with a number. Probably closer to 12 if you're adding in that. The support, the institutional supports that we want for our students of color and women. So there we've got some back of the envelope numbers already in terms of the balance in that middle space. It depends on how big of an ask we want. If we're going after mathematics in a very big way, that could be $40 or $50 million. That seems to be quite substantial. Of an ask and probably unrealistic, quite honestly. So if it's sort of the activities and incentives, another 5 is very reasonable. 10 gets us more, to impact and support STEM hubs in terms of additional programming.
Well, and I greatly appreciate the back of the envelope work, especially because this is the last meeting we're having before all this is decided. We're never going to meet as a council before this has all been booked down in the governor's budget, right? Because we're not scheduled to meet until when? Next month?
Third week in October.
Third week in
And
October.
it's put to bed, at least initially, in regards to the first numbers going in. And this is the first time I believe this council's heard any mention of any dollar amounts for STEM hubs, and there's been no debate on whether or not we think that number, even if it's on the back of the envelope, is it in the right realm? Maybe there's people sitting in the council that think it needs to be a lot more or a lot less, and that's the concern here, is that we're not in alignment as a council to move forward here. And
I believe we put forward these numbers actually in our May meeting. In the initial conversations.
we back of the envelope it, but
We've
haven't
ballparked and talked about some gives and
voted
takes.
on it or otherwise endorsed it.
Well, and maybe to Jim's comment about supporting or working or collaborating or whatever the appropriate verb is with Nancy for the long-term strategy, I even understand a stepwise approach towards what we think the spend should be, let's say 10 years from now, with the current realization of what our budget in the state really is. I would be interested at the right time here, at least of having had that conversation, because then we can support what the trades are right now. Because we understand there's trades. But we haven't actually talked about the numbers for the next biennium or the one beyond that to get to how many STEM hubs.
Right, so and if we're talking in that context, back to that earlier conversation about saying that we're going to have hubs that cover the whole state. Well, we can talk about when that's going to be, but if we actually have an agreement that is going to happen, then now we're just arguing over how many dollars we're going to apply towards that now, as opposed to if there are going to be any dollars at all.
Yeah. And if they haircut us, it's going to take us longer. And if they don't haircut us, then we can do it faster.
Exactly.
The bigger issue here is how do you integrate some of this into the school system? And none of this addressed mathematics, which is a huge lift. If you look at just your point, if you want to tackle the mathematics, it's not just 5 or 6 million. It's if we do it systemically across the system.
One of the things that I think would be an interesting conversation to have is that industry engagement. And I think that if we're going in big around math, there's, there could be a place go in quite substantially there from an industry perspective as well. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am familiar with the Intel math program, which is actually quite well research-based math program, and that could be an opportunity to also demonstrate a public-private partnership. I've been having conversations with local philanthropy to assess interest in some private funding to go alongside public funding in that middle strategy, and whether or not that seems something that they would like to do. And there's certainly a desire to start aligning their strategies with our strategies in terms of what is the research saying, and what do they know, and what do we know in that. So I think this idea of coming at this collectively to get support, not just legislative support, but other types of support is going to be a critical piece.
So we have, in the budgetary process, the governor makes his recommended budget. That's going to get obviously tweaked and negotiated and everything else as soon as the election's done and they realize what kind of legislature they have to deal with. That's occurring this fall. We should be, in industry at the same time, right now and moving forward, as you know, is going to be formulating their own vision and ask. And right now, I would argue that there's probably a huge disparity of what industry thinks that ask should be and what maybe sounds like is going to land in what we're even asking informally to land in the governor's budget. And if there's too much of a delta there, any of our education or state employees will not be able to advocate or work on behalf of anything but what's in the governor's budget. So if the whole STEM budget goes in at $10 million, you can't ask for 11 because you're a state employee. Laura McKinney can't ask for 11 because she's a state employee. She can only ask for what's in the governor's budget or its insubordination. So we've got to hopefully have.
Not that either Laura or myself has ever been insubordinate.
You're shy but it would be better
There's a fine line there.
It would be extraordinarily
No,
helpful
that's yes.
if we're closer in line with where things land than being way apart. And I just get this feeling we're going to be apart by tens and tens of millions of dollars.
Well, what I'm hearing is a need to sit with Dr. Golden and discuss, how can industry support this, and specifically the role of the STEM Council in advocating for these within and without, inside and outside of the governor's ask. Is that?
Well, I just don't want Dr. Golden to think that a $12 million ask or $15 million ask from the STEM Council is what industry wants, because because we're supposed to represent industry to a certain degree here, and I don't think a $12 million ask is what our constituency wants. They want something much larger than that, as evidenced by the fact that if we don't ask for it as a STEM Council, industry is going to come in over the top and ask for it, and this STEM Council is going to look pretty stupid as representing industry for not having made the bold ask out of this STEM Council, right? This is the first money ask that this council is being asked to have it weigh in on, and we're going to lowball it or go in easy, or should we be going in as a change agent and making the conversation become poignant enough that somebody debates this at the level where there's money?
And to those back in the envelope, that's where you're talking 30 to 50 million. I'll make it broad here, not 12, because 12 takes care of one of the lines and ignores the other two. And I say it that way because if it is 12, it doesn't feel like there's the right strategic plan to debate the pros and cons of then what we do with that money and what the implications are of having it be small. If it's 30 to 50, there's still that same discussion as, okay, well, how does that fit Dr. Golden's long-term strategic plan? So there's just a disconnect in my mind between the ask we're about to make and why the council would even make that ask looking out ahead.
I'm not sure the STEM Employers Coalition that sponsored the STEM Investment Council legislation would be real happy if I went back and we briefed them and said we're going to go ask for $10 million or $12 million. They'd be like, really? We spent all that time, all that effort, pulled a bill together, got a STEM investment council together, and you asked for what? I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Especially if our answer is, well, that's how the process went.
Yeah.
I know what my boss would do if I came back with that answer.
Yeah. So I think we need to be somewhat, our job isn't to be shy flowers. Our job is to cause a conversation to occur. And yeah, with the understanding that within that debate, we may certainly get pared down to something that is more realistic to the budgetary process and the economic state of the state. But we should be at least making that conversation occur.
Well, I think Eric made a very important distinction there, is that we can have these conversations, right? I mean, we aren't constrained by the processes of state government. So for us to say a big number, and we say that's what it looks like, and then just to have to backpedal later, that's a, okay, go ahead and do that. That's your process. But don't start us with a really small thing and say, well, that's it. And I guess the part that's really interesting is that we're not talking money here. Well, why not? Because we can talk about money. We can talk about it really well. And I think the other part that comes along with that is the industry can bring support too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's not just your dollars. So I guess there's another part of that, is that if you want to come with $10 million and the project is a $50 million project, don't come looking over here because you didn't ask large enough. It's like, ask what you really need.
It would be very exciting to be saying, we see it to be $35, $50 million. Here's why. Here's those 3 big things we're pushing at. And then there's the discussion of what give and take has to happen. Because then we're managing expectations too, right? End up with a smaller budget. Well, then we have the right, okay, how are we gonna do that now? Coming back, we set the tone that there's going to be a bigger ask eventually if it doesn't happen now, as opposed to the other way around.
And I think some of our largest advocates within the legislature that helped us get here as well would be very disappointed if we don't make a larger ask. They'd be surprised.
To Mark, along those lines, try and be helpful here. If we really decide we'd like to do the bigger ask, what do you need from the council to back that up?
Well, I think given where things currently lie, I think it would be wise for us to enter directly into a conversation with Dr. Golden about the concerns expressed by the council, and to collectively come up with a strategy both to communicate those concerns to the broader OEIB and to get a clearer understanding of sort of the advocacy strategy moving forward. Because as the legislation is written, we are formed under the OEIB and report to the Chief Education Officer as an independent counsel who is there to advise and to put that advisement out on the table in very clear terms. It is also the council's job and role to develop a more comprehensive strategic plan, which is something we have not yet had the opportunity to do, and we have not yet had the necessary, I think, advisory group and the expertise at the table in order to do that work, which is extensive, effectively. And that's some of the work. So without putting the cart before the horse, we have, I think, some really strong strategies that have been put forward that also came out and are backed by the work of the STEM task force, which was also a broad task force earlier. So I feel very good about the recommendations that we're putting forward, but I would suggest that what we do is have a representative group from this council have a candid conversation.
I think a whole council. I mean, I don't think there's that many of us that. Yeah. If we get a normal turnout, we'll have a good representative. So maybe by all council. But I do think it's important because what we've done is kind of walked into this. We haven't addressed all the issues. We haven't addressed the mathematics issue at all. I mean, 3 proposals, though they have some tangential effect on mathematics, But mathematics is a critical piece of this thing, and it's really, these three things might tangentially hit it, but they're not going to systematically hit the math system, like third grade reading. If we wanted math proficiency like we wanted reading proficiency, that's a big ask. And I imagine when you look at the number for third grade proficiency, the same kind of challenge would be for math proficiency, same kind of money, and that's not anywhere necessarily in our plans right now, but it's part of our charter, which is increase the proficiency in math.
It's a six-figure lift in regards to the number of students you're trying to impact. I'd argue it's much more, it's so much broader than STEM specifically, but it is focusing on kids that probably have a significant interest or trying to get kids to have a significant interest. This is broad-based. If we're doing math stuff, that's every kid in the entire system.
Absolutely.
So you're talking about tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, I mean, it may be changing the way we teach. I mean, that may be more the case. Some of it may be teacher education, but part of it's the way we teach math.
And again, we are advisory, and therefore I don't think it's going to hurt anybody's feelings here if we throw something against the wall and it doesn't stick. But I want to throw something against the wall.
I mean, from an advisory standpoint, if we come out with our ideas around the mathematics lift and it fits Dr. Golden's strategy for how she's handling that through already, the program we heard about earlier in other ways, fantastic. I think it's more just that we
You see the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly pieces of the mathematic puzzle that are being addressed by, but there isn't a comprehensive strategy at this point to that. We've been focusing nationally on mathematics through No Child Left Behind for years, and oftentimes it's resulted in sort of math being taught slower and louder, not better.
2 plus 2. Let's try it again.
Well, I liken it to being in a foreign country and not quite knowing the language, and you think if you speak English, I need to find the bathroom. That's suddenly going to
You see it all
make
over
a difference.
I mean, my poor kids, just a side note, my poor kids have been taught mode, mean, and median extensively for weeks at a time throughout middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally went in and said, what the hell, right? They got it. And they said, well, it's on the test. It's one of the key areas of the test that we're being evaluated on.
Teaching to the
Common
test.
Core.
So they are getting hammered on those things as opposed to anything else.
So I put that out a second ago, Mark, because the lift we're talking about from a finance ask and having recommendations and advice towards the broader strategy, to me, are two pieces of the conversation with Dr. Golden.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that the council, I think, thinks we should ask for the biggest lift to take care of mathematics at all.
Nope.
But there is a lift that's significant that we should recommend. And there's the conversation about how that dovetails in with lifting mathematics through other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To me, there's two pieces of the conversation.
Go even farther back. Does Nancy want specific asks, or does she just want an overarching strategy at the 100,000 foot level? Because as we start to make asks, we plunge right down to the 10,000 foot level, saying we want this much money right here, right? Or does she just want to hear that these are our priorities, and she will decide through the normal budgetary process how much money goes. There's a massive difference. It's about us micromanaging the STEM investments, or it's about us not.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll second that. You can look at this from a very strategic perspective. In other words, how do you set the framework for success across the state, recognizing it's going to look different in different locations? Okay, and then if you set that structure, what do you actually need to do in each of those locations, and how do you fund that? Okay, well, she has to deal with all of that. What level of involvement do you want us to have? Do you want us to actually be out in the Dalles telling people what they should be doing in their math class and how much money it should cost to do that? Or would you rather we say, okay, well, here's the framework that we're going to use to actually touch the people in these different locations. Here's how we allocate dollars going into those locations. Here are the measures that we need to have to ensure that the right things are happening there. And here's a process that allows people in those locations perhaps to even evolve their own solutions, recognizing that we're looking for specific measures coming out of that we as a council put together.
Yeah, it's definitely the latter, and I think that we've established, you really want to roll up your sleeves and go teach math? Great. Get involved, Wayne. That would be wonderful. There's several different, pieces to the a very complex system around the mathematics issues, and many of them are. We have a lot of opportunity there because there's alignment conversations happening. There's work with the Eastern Promise Replication Grants, which are really looking at getting dual credit options for high schoolers and connecting to community colleges and four-year universities around programmatic alignment, so that you ensure you earn credit, and that credit actually carries you forward into counting towards a degree program. There's mathematics redesign. There's the developmental math work going on. There's some of this proficiency work going on. There's the implementation of the Common Core, standards, both from an assessment and a pedagogical piece through the Network of Quality Teaching and Learning. So we've got multiple pieces there. The STEM Investment Council can I think, make strong recommendations to elevate that work and get greater coherency in that work, and to invest, to make recommendations in investment, the actual dollar amounts that get invested. I think at this point, I wouldn't have an idea of what those dollar amounts it would take. We can, and we would need, I believe, additional expertise at the table to help get into the weeds enough to do that. That, I don't believe, is where we are as a council.
And there's another approach here I was just sitting here thinking about. You could approach this as we need 5, 5, and 15 to say for now. And this is helping inform us on our long-term strategy. We're trying to learn some things before we jump in and say this is the right answer. And this is a step in the right direction to put the seeds in the ground, to experiment, learn, see what kind of impact. Put the math thing aside, which we really need to have some more learning from Nancy on what her mathematics strategy is, because that's a whole strategy. This is really focusing on the science side of it, STEM side, the engineering, the application, the hands-on kinds of things. Could approach it that way and say, this isn't the ultimate ask. This is the first ask of a plan to get to where we need to go. We need to inform. We don't really have a long-term strategy that Nancy and we agreed to. We're not going to do that in a day. But we could say we need to be very clear that this is important to put the seeds in the ground, and this is what we expect. And we can then, be honest, tell industry, we're not ready to make the big ask yet because we don't know enough. And that's not an excuse, but I think it's reality, is we're still trying. We haven't even got results from the STEM hubs to know that they're actually getting the results we're looking for.
We do have some results from the STEM
but
hub, so I don't want to say that.
You're talking long term. I mean, it takes a number of years to start turning the ship around here. So I mean, you got some results, I agree, but you have to see a couple years of kids actually making different choices and doing things differently.
Yes.
If you're trying to look at metrics on this.
Jim, that resonates well with me, because those numbers at least play off investments already going that we know have some good results, at least initial results, and it's not a huge jump yet. And it at least gets out on the table the other things we want to get discussed over the next year,
Right.
in order to really build up where
Well,
it
and
needs
let's
to
be
be.
clear, a big ask is not going to get funded.
Well, and
right.
frankly, we need to test some of these concepts with mathematics and some other programs to see what kind of results they get to help Nancy and others figure out what is the pathway to a better education system related to math. And let's not assume we have the answer right now, because if we have the answer, then you know what the price tag is, and we don't. So we're just kind of going like this, when the price tag may not be that high once we know how to do it. Maybe just training in it and a different way of teaching. So I guess that's where I would be comfortable, but we need to be clear and communicating this isn't the end of the game, this is the start of it, and this is the, we need to start making the movement in this direction. We have a plan, but we haven't got a full strategy developed, which is the next step in our process.
Well, I'm glad to hear that the council recognizes our own ignorance to some extent. I think that what we have put forward in terms of support for the STEM hubs and some of these other investment strategies is with the idea that a lot of that expertise exists in the field with people who and we need to be relying and counting on great communications between us and that wisdom of practice, if you will, and to create a dynamic and a relationship that honors that, and that make sure that as we develop a larger strategic plan for the state, a more comprehensive one, a more detailed one, that we are getting those necessary voices at the table in order to inform this. Right now we're in a very unique position, and I feel the sense of urgency from the council, and I live that sense of urgency daily and agree with it. So I think before us right now is what degree of influence and partnership can we provide and assert in this process that is helpful to move things forward in a collaborative way. So when we put forward with the STEM hubs this idea of collective impact, that it takes multiple perspectives here in order to actually achieve the end results. What as a for the state, for where I'm sitting as the director of STEM, I want to mirror that same philosophy at a statewide level. How are we incorporating workforce, economic, education, industry, out-of-school type providers in our thinking, so that we're not doing this in the not repeating historical conversations that have existed between our workforce and industry and our education system. We cannot do that because it's not effective.
Understood.
It just doesn't work.
Compounded though, we only get to ask for money every 2 years. So you better ask now, because once you have your answer 18 months from now, you're not having money to do anything with it.
So let's make sure we ask.
So let's have an ask. And to me, what I heard from Jim was we get to lay out a framework for some of where we want to be going, which, to your point, allows us a framework in which to bring in, like you said, the advisory committee and the other pieces that we know we don't have right now. But it's a chance to say, here's where we start, here's where we expect to be going. And to me, because it would help us guide our work for the next year. So,
Well, and more importantly, we message that and communicate that to Nancy and others, so that we advocate for it probably too. This is a start, and this is how it fits, and this is not the end, but it's the beginning. So.
Well, what are we bringing to the table in those conversations, I think, is an important piece of this. If we're going to be making an ask, what are we also bringing? So as a STEM council, what, are we backing this up? Are we just asking others to be putting out, again, So are we able to bring $5 million to the table? Are we able to bring, as a statewide push around, K-8 mathematics? Are we able to, what can we lever here?
Well, I think business needs to see where the ROI is too, and where we can be helpful. I think we could bring manpower and people to the table. Money isn't always the answer. Sometimes it's our industry expertise. So.
I mean, to a great degree, all this doesn't matter, because there's only so many guys and gals down in Salem that actually get to vote, right? And what matters to them is that industry and voters have their back when they make a tough decision, and that they don't get voted out of office because they supported STEM. They got to know that there's going to be support for them when tough decisions have to be made. We've completely blown your entire agenda pieces here.
Not a problem.
I know there's some stuff that probably can get moved to the next meeting, but
Absolutely.
in regards to this section 3, what are some of the critical dates as you see them before we meet again in the next 30 days? When does the OAIB expect to put numbers to their governor's budget? Secondary question I'd ask is, any new programs? Is it OAIB's intention to ask for plus-up dollars for new programs, or are they going to reallocate existing educational dollars into supporting new programs? So if we ask for $15 million, it's got to be new 15, so it's got to come from the legislature? Or is it possible that OAIB just restructures their own internal budget funding system so that we get the 15 from existing state dollars? I just used 15 as a placeholder.
Yeah, and understood. I think given, new dollars are always hard, particularly, in an environment where the economy isn't growing at leaps and bounds, but it is growing. I think there's always a desire to find efficiencies within the system wherever possible, to do the work and to do it smarter and better. And I know that sounds I feel unclean just saying that.
I was going to say, you sound very much like you work for an agency.
Good. I'm learning.
It's not a yes or no question, but
Yeah.
the standpoint is that do you see our ask, if we put it forward, as being new dollars that have to go through the legislature, or do you see them not, or that not being the case?
Well, I think these are. We've already talked about plussing up the STEM hubs. So we're saying, okay, there was a strategic investment this last round that was $2.5 million. We believe that it's showing great promise. We would like to double down on that and go forward with another, $2.5 million. I think that sounds really reasonable. It's using the monies that were funded last time. You're asking for an increase because it's shown promise. When we're looking, we're saying the same thing around the talent development council, the post-secondary talent development space. You're saying, okay, here's what's worked in the past. We know that we have additional workforce needs. Okay, that's an easy ask. The middle piece is a tougher ask, and we.
So my confusion on the process, and maybe you can educate all of us on this, is that happen? The OEIB is going to be putting forward an overarching ask from the state in regards to their total budget, right? They don't go in and say, they may have some of the details in it, but they're going to go ask for $9.3 billion from the legislature, and the legislature is going to sign off on 9.3, 8.7, whatever they have. And then you guys get a big chunk of change, and you get to divide it up amongst whatever way you want to. So you're talking about internally to the OEIB, you're asking for money to come to our programs in such and such format. What I'm saying is, are you going to ask for new money specifically from the legislature for our programs that has a House bill assigned to it? Those monies are earmarked directly into those programs. They may flow through the OEIB, they may flow through ODE and the HEC and everything else, but those monies are earmarked. They cannot go into the big pot and get disseminated into anything the OEIB decides. Instead, they directly go to these initiatives, because that's what a legislative concept is. That's what a bill ends up being. Boom, the money goes there. It can't go anywhere else. And the danger, I think, of the LC, the going through the legislature, is a harder ask, like you mentioned. That's what I would term new money, right? That has to be found and allocated. The other one is dangerous for us because there's no guarantee it happens.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm asking. Which way are we telling Nancy that we want to go with this? If she gets her wildest dream and OEIB gets their big number that they put down, we win, right? And we're in there for a particular allocation, that's great. But if she gets cut, are we on the table for the cut?
And then how does that fit back with how the council was formed?
So the
by the
strategy
legislature?
would be to decide, because if it's a pathway, if it's the harder path of going in and getting a bill written, then that's where I think industry suddenly has a massive voice in regards to getting something for this organization. Is that because if industry lines up, and I think it's prepared to go in for CTE and STEM and really make a big ask for new money, then I think we may lose there, but if we win, we'll really know we're going to win. I mean, it's clear.
It seems that we've got dual processes here.
Yeah.
Right, that are going on. From the OEIB perspective, they are going to be agreeing whether or not these are the right concepts to be made as a recommendation to the governor. The actual process for determining and identifying the final line items, I do not fully understand what the process is for determining the figures associated with it. I think it's very relevant and pertinent. I mean, it's appropriate for the STEM Investment Council to put forward those figures to Dr. Golden so that she's fully aware of what our ask is in those conversations. I think what we would like to do from the prior conversation that I'm hearing is to set up a meeting with Dr. Golden
Path and
the
advocacy.
extent of the advocacy outside of the OEIB process. Is that
Well, yeah,
a fair?
we need to choose a path, which way.
And there may be advantages of making this all encompassing in terms of both CTE and STEM and mathematics or something like that. So.
Yeah, that in terms of legislative strategy, I don't know what will work most well with the legislature. I've heard both
Legislature
sides.
did set it up. They said we thought STEM was important. We
Yep.
wanted these kind of outcomes. Now, how are you going to do it? So now the question is, what's the best?
And the sense of urgency here is those legislative concepts. So let's say we're told to go ask for new money, right? Don't do it through the OEIB's base budget omnibus, but go find a separate LC for it. We're going to run out of time in regards to getting the LC written and sponsored and teed up at the legislative level. So this decision kind of has to happen here this month. And that's why that was that next question. When does the OEIB make their recommended, when do we find out what the OEIB's budget is going
We
to the governor?
will understand what they will be voting on these concepts at the next OEIB meeting.
Which is 23rd, 20 something. It's like next week, right?
No, it's in October.
Is it in October?
Yeah.
There was significant buzz around meetings we had 2 weeks ago and then earlier this week in Salem about middle of this month, you better have some of this figured out.
September 22nd.
What's that date?
Legislative concepts are due.
Yeah. Thank you.
September 22nd?
Next week.
Next
Yeah.
week.
Wednesday?
Exactly.
Oh, that's Monday.
Monday?
And if we miss them,
That's right.
you know, it's not that we can't put a bill in, I believe, again in December and everything else, but we lose the opportunity to have an LC on record and do all the running up the flagpole and seeing who salutes and be able to make and negotiate changes and adds and subtractions this fall, as opposed to trying to do any of that work in January when all the legislators' focus suddenly becomes everything but a very specific bill.
Mark,
And
who owns the line item in the Nancy's budget? In other words, who would defend this number in the budget? So you have to submit something to the governor. Here's the big budget. Here's the line that says what this group is going to end up asking for. Who makes the case for that? Who defends that? Is that
to
you?
the governor.
No,
Yeah,
to
well,
Nancy.
to Nancy, yeah.
To Nancy, that will be me.
I think the challenge, though, is you've got these three ideas. STEM is kind of sprinkled through here. There'll be $1 assigned to this based on everyone's ask. Then the question is, well, get maybe everything you get. To Eric's point, what gets cut? You know, and who makes that decision at the end of the day in terms of that? Because these are broad programs that have a STEM component, but there are other components to these things.
And then ultimately, do you feel like you're in a position where you can advocate as strong as you believe the council wants you to do so, or are you going to put your job in jeopardy by pissing off the wrong people? Do you need us to
That's getting kind of personal now.
No, do you need us to be in
Yeah,
there
well,
doing
I
this,
think
right?
that's our job. Is
That's
to
how
advocate.
to be supported here.
Yeah.
It's important.
I mean, this is
I have-
serious things. I mean, this is a lot of money. This is a big point. This is a critical point for this entire council because this is the coming out of the chute. If you don't get something done, you will drift off into the sands of irrelevancy here very rapidly, where this council will lose council members who aren't happy because nothing got done, right? And you'll lose legislators who move on and don't get reelected. We're already losing Harker, right? And you know, how quickly do we lose our support so that we miss the moment? We talked about the Oregon moment, right? 16 things or 15 things around a circle that say this is the time to be bold, this is the time to make these asks. And when those bubbles start popping, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to do.
And as you know, there have been several conversations that are underway outside of the OEIB processes with industry members on the career and technical education and the STEM side. What those constituents feel that they need to put forward, I think, is their decisions to be advocating for. My role is within the the OEIB, the Office of the Chief Education Officer, and I need to honor that process and follow that process. The STEM Employers Coalition and others are certainly an important constituency to align our efforts with. And I feel very strongly that we need to align those efforts.
Well, I would make the recommendation to this council to protect you and others, that we make sure that we have a strong voice and that we are in the conversations, because you wear many hats. And if you are also in charge of CTE as well as STEM, and at some junction you may have to make a Sophie's choice, I don't want you to have to be the one.
I'm not in
crosshairs.
charge of CTE,
No,
and
no,
I'm not in
you're
charge
an
of
advocate
STEM.
for-
I am the director
No,
of
but you're
STEM for
an
the
advocate
OEM.
for,
I am,
right? And there's going to be Sophie's choices to be made at some juncture, and I think
There's
if
already-
we want our voice, we better be the ones doing it.
There's already a legislative concept out there on CTE,
Yeah.
and the people are drawing up bills and stuff like that to raise money. So
Yeah. All right. So the 22nd was one deadline we had rolling. Do you think it's October for the governor's budget?
I can check with you. and
So what I
get back to you
suggest
on
we do
that.
is let's get a meeting with Nancy, and we'll try to get that as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
And it can be either by phone or some of us in person to the extent we can do that. And let's kind of pick her brain on what she's thinking. She may have already thought through some of these strategic things. We need to know what her commitment is to the strategy and where it fits, and how we best can move it forward. So I think that's good counsel from the council, and Mark will get that set up, and we'll
I'll
move
get that
quickly
set
on
up
it.
immediately.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Was a great
Right.
discussion. That was good. That was the kind of serious conversation we need to have here. That was good. So I think you
Do
got
you want to
clear.
take 5, or do we want to and allow us a conversation around the agenda, or?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Yeah.
That's a great
Sure,
idea.
let's take a 5-minute. So we've got about 30 minutes, and we've got to leave about 10 minutes for public comments. So we're going to try to get through a couple agenda items. So we're going to go to number 5 and talk a little bit about the work plan for this year. Let's assume that we get funding to move things forward, but we still have a fair amount of work to go in terms of filling out our agenda. And so what we included here was some potential goals for considering to get done this year. And just like to get your feedback, input, thoughts on what else we should add or take off this list, and maybe a little bit about priorities. So just look at the list for a minute or so. Look at the list, kind of think about what you think are the most important things to work on, and let's see if there's anything, first of all, missing or things you would take off the list. And then maybe a little bit about priorities. So,
Right here, 5.
I'd move create comprehensive strategic plan to the first bullet.
based on our last discussion, something we have we've learned a lot over the last year, but clearly it's something we need to get working on in terms of how this all fits and ensure that we have a long-term plan to address the needs that we're supposed to address.
We might even be able to sub-bullet some of these under maybe 3 broader goals.
Okay?
To me, key metrics and set targets can almost be not tactical. I know there's a strategy there, but that's going to be done as part of the
Strategic plan, that's got to be part of that.
there's actually creating the strategic plan, and then there's also forming the framework for which we are working, and that is where the advisory committee and maybe some other things come in.
Intentional partnerships and advocates as opposed to not intentional. I don't know what the definition is.
Hanger on.
Well, I think that there's partnerships that already exist, and there's partnerships that we need to develop.
New partnerships.
New partnerships.
Okay.
What are those ones that we need to be reaching for? If we're looking at a more holistic approach to STEM and CTE and that connection, then we need to be much more intentional about connecting to the workforce investment boards. We need to be reaching out to labor and industry, bringing different people together around that conversation.
If I was to I think obviously the strategic plan needs to be a real focus for us. Some of these fall under that. Some of these are helping us develop that. So like the advisory committee is helping us do that. The partnerships are helping us do that. metrics was something we'll have to have. So there's a whole stream of work stream around building the strategic plan. So we'll organize that. Funding, we've already had that conversation, so we obviously got to figure that out. That's almost a separate track. Anything else that we ought to, the infrastructure to monitor, and that's important. That's, again, part of the plan, I think, is we want to look at a comprehensive plan. It would have outcomes, metrics, and infrastructure to support that.
So it's an operational framework
Yeah.
from a company perspective.
Yeah. Anything missing? So what we'll do is we'll reorganize this into a work stream so that it follows the typical business model where we start with the strategic plan, then we get to key strategies, and then some of the support stuff that we need to have to make the plan work. And then I think there is this need, as we talked about earlier, we've got to get aligned with Nancy. If this is the long-term strategy, this is a comprehensive plan strategy, we've got to get agreement that we have alignment with Nancy on what that plan is. So we've got to get it to the three. We got the two outcomes that we know we're supposed to get, which is more STEM degrees and more proficiency in math and science. So we have to focus to make sure we accomplish those goals, and then assure that this plan will achieve those goals. And then we got to get Nancy to see if she's going to buy into it. So I don't know if we just do what we think was right and we'll deliver it to her, or we work collaboratively in a kind of a process. But we can kind of work with it. It might be a question we could ask Nancy when we meet with her also.
Jim, what if we considered bringing a framework outline of this into that discussion with her?
It's a good idea.
And part of it could be also how she'd like to work for this biennium, but also the next biennium. You know, she may have some thoughts on what you were saying, whether this stays, let's say it stays internal to OAIB this time around, but perhaps there is an LC next time. We can at least open the door to that.
That's a good point. You mentioned something offhand in the hallway that I think it's important that you understand too, though, is how many of us can be in a room with Nancy before it's a public meeting? If there's a quorum, if we all of a sudden have a quorum, there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So there's 9 of us, so we can only have 4 representatives in the room before there's problems.
Because no decision making can happen, right?
No decision making, yeah. So, okay, just so that we make sure that when we call our meeting, we figure out some of those logistics.
Eric.
Everybody
have that.
Again, my job's a suicide bomb. And everybody else goes in and fixes it. Right? So
let's not open with that, Eric.
Not a good start.
I'm done.
That's not fair.
Somebody else has got to speak.
Does that mean it's a one-time thing?
No.
No, see, he's like a cat.
9 times, yes. I'm on about 6 this
we'll
year.
we'll work on that.
This week?
Yeah, this week.
Okay, well, I will definitely be there, and
Okay,
we'll
that'll
add
be
a couple more. So. Okay, so we will flesh this out a little bit more, talk about what we want to accomplish, make sure Nancy's aligned with that, and as we meet with her, we'll just talk about our general thoughts on working on this. We really do need to get working on the components. I think our October meeting really ought to focus on getting our sleeves rolled up on what a strategic plan looks like, and I think there's some great models. There's some things like what's going on in Massachusetts and other places that we can draw on to see what a good strategy looks like. So, not opposed to stealing great ideas. So there's a number of these things that have been done across the country, and we got to pick out the best of those things and get that material to us to look at. So he gave us the Massachusetts, which was interesting. There's others that sounds like that got strategic plans around STEM.
There's several states that have strategic plans. As you, the council knows, we're part of a multi-state network called STEMX, 19 states, and we're in regular communications with them. I'll reach out to them around who feels like they have some comprehensive strategic plans in place. Joe O'Shura did some research around several of the states already and reviewed some of those plans. Massachusetts has come up before. There's a couple of other states that we need to look more closely at. Some of their plans, again, were really quite unique as a state because of the way we're trying to transform this. Most of them are either from a business community perspective or from a higher education perspective that is driving that, and you get different flavors that way. And so this is, it'll look a little different.
Well, but at the end of the day, that's the outcomes we're looking for. We've
Yep.
got to produce the type of students and graduates that we're looking for. Okay, so let's we will do that, and that'll be scheduled for October, and we'll reorganize this in a way that makes sense from a strategic plan, and we'll talk to Nancy about that when we meet with her also. All right, let's move on to the next part of the agenda, which I think you wanted to cover, Mark.
Yeah. Well,
Subcommittees on, I think that's number 6.
well, I think, a lot of things have come up over our conversations last year, and then looking at sort of the various needs that are going to support the development of a strategic plan, and to also, build a broader, I guess, advocacy base for the work that we're doing, and so I just put together, a proposal that in order to move this work forward, we need to also be doing some things offline that are feeding into the bigger process, and this is where I'm asking for help from the council to lead some of these efforts. And I put 4 broad categories down there for the audience. Those 4 categories, as just sort of for discussion at this point, are around data and metrics, around communications and advocacy, around partnership development, both from the industry partnerships, the human capital, intellectual capital, the financial resources, working with philanthropy and other donors who could support this effort in different ways, and then looking at research and effective practices that then really are going to be tied directly to the STEM hubs and the investments. And some of these may be too early to get some of these started, but this is something that are these ones that feel right, or should we be doing something else?
Let me ask a process question. Let's just take data and metrics, which we know is going to be important. Would you see a council member being kind of a lead in that area, but where's the staff coming to help do the research and the work? I don't think that council members are going to be equipped to take that on if they don't have staff to do it. So how do you see that happening?
No, good question. So one of the things, after speaking with the employment department and getting the data the very first time around, the critical question that exists in this is, what is a STEM job? What is a STEM degree? Is that enough? Should we be doing STEM courses, knowing that many STEM degrees, people work in STEM jobs, not necessarily in their minds they're directly tied, but from the way the data is counted, there is not a strong correlation. And this is, again, what plays out on the national stage is you start saying, you hear the data that, we already have more than enough engineers in the pipeline, or 70% of the engineers aren't working in an engineering field, which is counter to what we hear from industry and what we hear from the employee themselves. So there's a lot of confusion out there. Many definitions don't include healthcare in the definitions of STEM. So we need to have a group that is pulling different people
Where's
together.
the staff? How's the staff? How's that all happen? That's a great conversation, but who's going to...
Yeah.
Audrey she's biting at the bit to do data and metrics. I know it. She's going to want to know how that happens, because she didn't have all the expertise.
Yeah.
And we have money to go get it. If I have to call Eco Northwest, I can take care of this, but I need 20 grand.
Oh, God.
That's right. So don't look to me, but to fully staff that, I would certainly be involved, because I love data. We have some capacity at the OEIB now to help with that, and on the research agenda side of things. And what we've talked about internally is pulling together the employment department workforce, the institutional researchers from our post-secondary institutions, et cetera, both public and private.
So essentially the way you play this out is there's some industry experts in this area, whether government and you'd bring them together. One of the council members would chair that meeting or be at that meeting, collect the input, make sure the questions are being answered, and ultimately be the sponsor, but not necessarily the expert in that field. But ask questions, make sure it's covering the issues, and then bring that back to the council, right? Is that the way you're thinking about this?
I would appreciate assistance in the scheduling, in terms of making sure that it all gets moving forward. I mean, there's keeping it, on track.
Right.
Is probably the biggest
Yeah, but the council
lift from a
needs
council
to know
member.
who the people are. I mean,
Sure,
they
and
have
we
to know where
can
they're- so-
certainly then have a
So I
conversation
get-
about how to do that.
One small life lesson. So ETIC for years never had any sub-councils or subcommittees whatsoever. We created 3 or 4 years ago 4 distinct sub-councils. When there's a lot to be done, they actually can do something. When there's not much to be done, they fall apart very quickly. So
Sure.
I think it's important. I think that what you do need to establish is that a council member chairs the subcommittees. Right?
Right,
That's the only.
right.
I mean, you got to have that, and with the expectation that the facilitator and owner, but they're not necessarily doing all the work.
Right.
And then you're going to have to get them. You're going to have. There needs to be a significant administrative support from whoever we have to facilitate it, because without Michelle Vitale over in
Yep.
the system, our sub-councils at ETIC would fall apart in a heartbeat. There needs to be that scheduled phone call, that scheduled meeting, that scheduled, all that support doesn't get done from a committee chair very easily.
Yeah.
So, this might be a stupid question. It would seem like Dr. Golden trying to put together the bigger educational strategy would be, in fact, needing this information. So maybe part of our conversation with her is her thought of how she's getting this done within the OAB staffed people. And I know that we might need a special slice
we have
or
that.
review.
Yeah.
Did you make a vegetarian ask for the next biennium in regards to staff to help you out at all?
For one additional FTE.
Okay. And this would this fall under their job description, or did you define the job description that closely?
It depends on to what extent we're managing grant dollars.
It's probably backbone more than anything else to support the hubs and other things, right?
Right. I think we can get the administrative support and also some of the support, the intellectual support on the data and the research pieces.
And this could be where our advisory committee comes into, for those folks who maybe already have
Yeah, they
direct
should be all
access to all that kind of information. I'm looking at the whole list, not just data and metrics.
Yeah.
This is another place to pull. Okay.
When do you want to establish? I mean, these look like obvious starting points that may fracture or condense depending on our experiences. When do you want to get this formed and staffed by?
That's the will of the council, right? I think that to me right now, communications and advocacy has a really significant priority. We need to make sure that, I believe that we need to be syncing our messages up with career and technical education advocates, with industry advocates, so that we are sounding in sync when we're dealing with the Office of the Governor and the legislature.
My concern is that we're so early in regards to not having a clear, necessarily defined strategic message, that if you put a subcommittee together right now, communications advocacy, they're going to go, I don't want to say rogue, but they're going to be put in a position to be making policy on the fly as they're being put in positions, because we don't have it clearly defined to hand over to the subcommittee and say, enact this. Instead, they're going to be constantly put in a position to make decisions, and that would be concerning.
It could be our first few people that meet with Nancy or Dr. Golden are, in fact, this initial.
I think that, yeah.
Because we have to understand what our obligatory role is.
They have to have a platform, or they're going to go off the reservation.
And it's not when necessarily they can support us necessarily, because of the budget issue. I mean, how do we, if we want more and they want less, and you got this issue, they can't go against the governor's budget. So,
It seems like the easiest is the research and effective practices, because we're going to have to do that. In other words, I guess I look at it as, how do you put together the people that can help us make the decisions that we're going to be making over the long term, and who ends up sitting at the table for that?
probably the most important thing we can do right now.
In regard to communication, and Aubrey, you mentioned what we're still making the case. I can tell you that the misconceptions around this work are very, very entrenched, and they're broad, and because we all think that we understand the link between what we're trying to do in economic development, that is not broadly accepted or understood.
In the
I'm
education
specifically
community,
talking
or-
about the OEIB, Mark. I mean, we've been having this discussion for a year and a half, if not two, with the OEIB.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I don't take that they don't know
No.
why this is important.
Yeah, I would argue.
Sorry.
You just espoused everybody in the agencies. You didn't espouse anybody in leadership, anybody in the public. You just hit the middle management role that doesn't want to change, in my opinion. I mean, I'm with her. I mean, we've been admiring this problem for
3-4 years.
longer than that.
Decade.
A decade. You know that, and it's. I know that
My
there's
reference
you've
was
got to pull
okay.
people along,
Sorry.
but
I know.
nobody voted no against the formation of the STEM Council in the legislature. Nobody did, right? And the concerns that came up were extraordinarily minor. And instead, it passed bipartisanly with great support. And now they're sitting there asking us, what are we doing with it?
Mm-hmm.
So, to her point, I think there's lots of people who know exactly what we're supposed to be doing and wonder why it's not happening.
I have a different take on that.
Yeah.
I think that people connect, and it's a natural, they hear what they interests them and will advocate for what interests them. And these cultural divides, these cultural perceptions and beliefs of the CTE being less than, of STEM being this and STEM being boring is widely entrenched in society at many, many different levels in many, many different ways. We've got Washington STEM to the north, which I worked for a couple of years there to get them off the ground, had an entire communication strategy and did public outreach to understand what public perception is, and worked diligently on always communicating. And it is, I could tell you right now,
Mark, I
they're
think we're talking
still
about two
doing
different
that.
things. I'm not denying
Perhaps.
that. I'm not denying that.
I think
Can
what
we-
we want to do is
Can we
sync
not
up
with
on
specific
common messages here, that we want
not-
to make
yes.
sure
Communication
that we
is always
are.
very important.
Yeah.
I mean, and look at Kyle and the work that the OBC has been doing, going around the state with Nancy and delivering this message.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I get
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
I mean, we don't need to rat hole on
Okay.
the OEIB not knowing what STEM is, because they do.
They do. It's just whether or not
They
it's a
do.
priority.
Yeah, I wasn't specifically talking about the OEIB. I was
Right,
talking
but I
about
think
as a council
that's why
and
we're
as
missing
a
each other's point. I
statewide
don't
sort
think
of
we need that.
organization,
I mean-
we need a broad communication
Strategy.
strategy that targets, public, it targets
Sure.
teachers, it targets legislators,
Right.
and how you convey that message and those messages varies depending on the different constituencies. And then it becomes a lot clearer for us to also advocate to Dr. Golden about ways that she can incorporate specific messages into her communications to the public, and that we're very specific on that. I think that would be a very helpful thing to develop.
I don't disagree.
So what do we want to do with this now? Do we want to have people?
Assign
So I think we
people or-
prioritize, assign, and then flesh out what is the deliverable at some point, but not this meeting. I think
I think the question is really these might be the right items in prioritization. We're also going to figure out how we staff them too, because without staff, it's not going to your point, it's not going to happen. So we'll take that offline, and we'll come back to you through your emails and see what your interest is, and try to define this, and I'll work with Mark on getting that to happen.
Okay. I'll volunteer for one.
Which would be
Put
interesting.
me on communications and advocacy.
yeah, and Eric too, right?
That's our racehorse. That's our racehorse. That is not the.
That's a Bronco.
When you want to do the research?
Partnerships.
Partnerships. Oh, that's good.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, you do.
I'll help you guys with the other one.
I'll help you, because we've got some ideas.
Well, and that one crosses very quickly. The partnerships and
I would like
advocacy
to be
piece
supportive of that one.
are extraordinarily cross-linked, because, you know, where our power lies is in the larger consortiums of business groups and others that are passionate about this. Because that's how you get something through the legislature.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we will draw for the rest of them
Okay.
and see where we go from there. But I think these are a good starting on the issues we got to cover. And, I think some of these sooner rather than later will be helpful. Okay. All right. So now, I think that's it for this public comments. We have 2 people that are going to make public comment. First, Cindy.
Can I just do a date check? We are next, October 15th is our next meeting.
Yeah.
We'll
Yes.
chair up to the
And
table
it's
here.
going
so you
to
can
stay
stand
on that
up.
day?
That's great.
Stay on that day.
Yes, our next meeting date is October 15th, I believe, is what we have on this calendar.
Yeah,
And if
that's what
there's
I have.
challenges with that, please let me know. ASAP.
No, it works for me. Where is it?
Yeah, location is.
Location,
Oh,
Portland or Salem at this point.
Salem would be great, but
How
I
about
respect.
Redmond?
Ben would be fantastic.
Let's shoot for Salem for the next
Yeah.
for the
We
next
wouldn't.
council
I mean, it's
meeting.
just-
Okay.
That's
Great.
easy. The other, this is.
Help Jessica out maybe. I will check with the other board members too to find out what their
Yeah.
commitment is too.
Yeah. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
guys.
right, Cindy.
So, Mr. Chair, my name is Cindy Robert, and I'm actually a lobbyist. And I just wanted to, a couple of us were talking in the
Use
back.
your help, it sounds like.
There you go. A couple of us were talking in the back about the committees that you just formed. Did you intend to have people, other stakeholders on those committees?
Yes.
Okay, good, because we didn't.
Yeah,
It's the
absolutely.
advisory group
Yeah.
agenda item that we didn't get to.
Oh,
We didn't
okay.
get to it. Yes, absolutely.
So I'm interrupting that too. So
No,
I
no, no.
apologize. So I'm here today on behalf of Learning.com. Learning.com is an Oregon-based company that is helping districts implement digital learning initiatives, and they're not a client of mine, but they are a passion. So I wanted to tell you a little bit why. I've had the privilege of working on all ends of the spectrum for education. I've done pre-K, K-12, and the higher ed realm. So in all those realms, I hear a lot about STEM, as we all do, and about the things that we need to do to make us reach 40-40-20 goals, and the role STEM plays in making more globally competitive and happy citizens, which is all very good. But one of the things that I was concerned about coming in, Learning.com coming in, that then I just kind of heard you guys all talking about was, where do we integrate the teaching of the skills, and how do we make what we're all talking about a real application? And as a matter of fact, as you talked about the 3 funding pieces, the hub funding, the STEM programming, and the talent development, all of those areas, even though you're going to come up with a big chunk of money, all of those areas you're going to have plenty of time through the policy option packages to determine where money goes to each program and what program you want it to be. But I would suggest that as you move towards the legislative session, that you actually figure out the details of at least one of them. And I think probably with your expertise, STEM programming would be the place to go. And I think I also heard Mark say that's probably the biggest chunk of money that you'll be looking for, and it's kind of flexible, he said. But it seems to me that as you look at that money for STEM programming, trying to dictate exactly what it looks like not only will help in the overall OEIB budget process, but will also help as you go to legislators, because as you know, they prefer to see something tangible. So as you looked at the STEM program, and if you could talk about it in the way of, these are the programs we're going to do that affect, maybe if you just start small, and we're only going to ask for 3 pots of money, but when it comes to STEM program, we want to do something boots on the ground that affects the teacher, the student, and the curriculum. 3 easy areas, because what we know for sure is that we need 21st century skills for students, 21st century skills for teachers, and we need project-based learning curriculum. You keep hearing that the reason we're behind in the STEM skills is because kids just aren't interested. So when are we going to talk about that? How do you get kids more interested? How do you make sure that they're not only interested one time, but all the way K through 8th grade? Because that should really be a focus. So with that all said, I just want to share, and I'm almost done, the 3 recommendations that Learning.com wanted to suggest and put forth today. One was that the STEM Council recommend that students K through 8 be assessed against the national ICT, which is the
International Society for Technical Educators.
perfect standards, so that we can measure how we're doing compared to peers at other schools. And then we can figure out where we need remediation and where we need to begin, but we don't have that basis right now. So we're talking about everything we want to do for STEM. We don't even know where our kids are right now. Maybe they're brilliant, we don't even know. Maybe they're doing much better K through 8, and it's in high school where they drop off. We've got to figure that out. Second thing, teachers need to be provided with a skill inventory that helps them determine where their skills are and helps them to find professional development that helps them to work on those skills. 2 really easy things that get us partway to those 21st century skills. Third thing is that in each core curriculum, a teacher incorporate at least one project. The best way for a kid to learn and the best way for a teacher to learn how to teach is to actually have programs involved in what they're doing. So that being said, I wanted you to know that the Learning.com wants to help in any way we can, and we actually believe that consideration of a formation of some kind of advisory council of the people who do this work in the classroom. I don't know if I want to call it a vendor group or a software group or an actual curriculum group, but to have a group come together not only might help advise you better on what we can do at all the different grades for STEM and doing something for the teachers, the students, and the curriculum, but might also have them work a little bit harder to integrate their packages so they can go out to the hubs and say, this is what we recommend you do on the ground, getting projects done, tangible programs that STEM can advocate for.
Am I wrong to think that the advisory groups that we would be pulling together would include companies exactly like that? Like Learning.com or individuals from companies like that?
I think we've got 2 advisory functions that we should consider. One is sort of representative groups here who sit with us at the table we've talked about, but then also within the work of the committees that we're bringing in a much broader groups to talk about very
What's
similar
possible.
types of items. Yeah, and this is certainly directly tied to effective practices and what's out there in terms of research and feed that into the STEM Hub network.
You know, one of the things my friend, Brian Rose said about this was that there's so many education companies in Oregon that are based in STEM, and that they'd all love to sit down and help, and maybe that leverages some money in the long run too.
Just a question, is Learning.com a project-based curriculum, or is it multi-skilled, or what is?
It's really 3 things. First of all, it's the cyber citizenship for students, and I think one of the things we talked about at the CT meeting is there's actually federal funding for that the state is not really taking advantage of, so we're kind of talking about how to better do that. So one piece is the cyber citizenship, teaching kids the skills they need, also teaching kids how to use those skills correctly, because sometimes they don't. Another piece is the teacher piece, making sure that teachers have the skills they need. And the other piece is when a teacher who's been teaching reading for a long time and says, I got to put STEM in here somewhere, how do you do that? There's a platform that Learning.com uses that allows them to go in and talk about what they want for reading and look around and say, oh, I want that Discovery channel video, and I want that PDF, and I want this interview, and I'm going to put it all together, and they put it together there on the platform, and it becomes a classroom project and a class course for them.
Sounds like something the professionals, the industry folks who are being asked to go in and teach could maybe draw from. Like, what do I do? What do I use?
And that's interesting you say that, because it's one of the things I found doing the CTE piece too, and I've been working with Representative Burden's group on the CTE licensure piece and how to get that fixed. But when it comes to CTE, that's very much where we need to bring people from outside in. I mean, that's where we're focused. But when it comes to STEM, we already have the people there. We just need to make sure they have the skills.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. Pat, Ryan.
That's me.
Yeah, okay.
I don't mean to be rude not to come to the
That's
table. I had knee surgery in June.
Okay. You can say that, it's
So
fine.
I'm a little bit recovering. I had a couple questions. It has to do more with the budget thing. Well, if you look at the state budget from the previous biennial, divide it by 2, and then you come up with the figure of what they would be giving the education unit for 1 year. why don't you just take 25% of the education budget for your calculation? And then also figure in the increase of fuel costs that has happened in the last 3 years, as well as the increase of the medical health care. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Thought-provoking idea. I like a percentage of the school budget.
Even 1% of the school budget. Half a percent for STEM.
Not 0.5% for STEM, 1% for STEM. It is a huge amount of money for the, and you would think you'd be able to shame people into making such
I
a small
suggested that to
investment.
Portland Schools Foundation about 5 years ago.
What, 5
You already
billion?
have a slide deck.
9
9 billion?
if you go K 20.
K through 20, 9 billion. 9 billion, you divide that in half, so it's about 5 billion a biennium.
1% of 5 billion, I'll take it.
Okay, 0.5%. Okay, thank you very much for that input.
Thank you.
Any other
Percentage, whether you do it or not.
comment? Well, we have a lot of work to do. I think this was a good we've been away from each other, and I think we had a little bit of energy, and it was good to see. I think we're all learning the legislative process. I think
We were pretty short, a third of our group today or more.
Yeah.
We need to get Jessica and Herb and Fred briefed in, and I think Tom.
Just sign them up for those 4.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, exactly. How did I become chair of ETIC? I didn't show up to the meeting. So I think
Right there, right.
these are our committee leaders right here. Just
we need to get better attendance if we're going to put them in that role.
There you go.
Did Jessica have her baby?
oh yeah,
I hope so.
I hope so. I mean, she was pretty. I mean, I haven't heard. I assume that she had it.
Yes.
She did.
she did.
That's good.
Great.
Right?
And what did you have?
Baby. A human.
Well, thanks for your input. We'll get back
Thank
to you
you,
in terms
everybody.
of time with Nancy. I think it was a
Yep.
great discussion. We've got a lot of work ahead of us this year, and I think we have to think about this as a journey. We've been at this not even a year, and I think we're still trying to feel our way to what our responsibility is. And I think after a year now, talking with Nancy, get a sense of what our role is and how we fit with her is important, because at the end of the day, as you look at the charter, we have to have a long-term strategy, and obviously not only a strategy, but a way to execute the strategy is important. So.
And I just want to make it clear, any of my comments aren't about being down on the mission or being down where we're going. I just want to make sure we have some artificial airlocks put in front of us by the system, that if we do not bust through here, we're liable to suffer long-term consequences.
Well, and as I mentioned earlier, there's discussions like CTE and others about legislative strategies to get funding for certain things that are outside the OEIB process, and kind of how's that fit with us, and what is our role, and where does that play if they're going to go do that and get industries doing their own funding, and we're here and we're part of OEIB. Is that from the legislative's perspective, it doesn't look like we're coordinated,
Right.
and I think. That's what we got to be aware of. The legislature wants this clean. They want it tied with a bow, and they want to make sure that there's support for it across all sectors. So it's not helpful for kind of internal fighting over money as opposed to what.
And I think we took a good step on, just so you know, last week on that issue, and started that process. So I think, and we're going to have continued meetings on it here moving forward, and I think we had a receptive audience on both sides of making sure we don't confuse it. So nobody seems to be building forts around there.
I think we all have the right intentions in mind. What's the way to get there?
Yeah.
We got to learn. We got to be a learning organization. So.
Well, and I think people still don't know how to deal with the OEIB because it's not
It's not just us.
right? So we don't know how to. The budgetary process is.
Well, maybe after you talk to Nancy, we want to go the other direction and carve out a certain set of funding to be clear about it. So it's a good question. So, okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks to all who participated. I'm sure you got to witness council working through its growing, but a good discussion. Thank you all.